Chapter 49. The moonlight shone through the paper window, casting the assassin's shadow on it. The feeling of the sword piercing through the body was indescribably wonderful. It was like breaking a fragile piece of porcelain, satisfying a human's desire to destroy. Ning Chen didn't think he was a pervert, but in order to save his life, he didn't mind experiencing this perverted feeling. A muffled groan came from outside the door. It was a woman's voice. It was very clear and couldn't be hidden. Ning Chen didn't like to hit women, let alone kill them. However, women who wanted to kill him were an exception. With a bang, the door was broken through by the wheelchair. Ning Chen rushed out of the room with the ink sword in his hand. He took 3 steps forward with the woman's body. Suddenly, a horrifying arrow light came from afar. It was so wonderful that no one could avoid it. You again. Ning Chen's pupils shrank. He was furious. This was the 3rd time. There was no end to it. The ink sword turned and took the woman's body in front of the wheelchair. Then, with a screech, the arrow light pierced through the woman's body. The momentary delay gave Ning Chen a chance to react. He grabbed the arrow with his left hand, but he felt a huge force. His whole body was pushed back 3 steps, and he crashed into the half-destroyed door with a bang. Ugh! Ning Chen groaned. Blood flowed out from his left chest and dyed his clothes red. The arrow was halfway into his body. It couldn't stop and couldn't go any further. Ning Chen was covered in cold sweat. This arrow was too dangerous. He wasn't Xia Miaoyu. He couldn't completely block this arrow. The woman was dead. Her eyes lost focus and she fell down powerlessly. Ning Chen pulled the arrow out of his chest. He was scared. If the woman hadn't blocked it, he would be the one lying on the ground. This person can't be left alive. Ning Chen was still sweating. Only after facing the arrow did he know how terrifying this person's archery was. However, he noticed that this person only shot 3 arrows at most at one time. Moreover, this person never showed his face. He had his suspicions when Zhang Sun was assassinated. At that time, if this person had come out to intercept them, he and Zhang Sun would have had no chance to survive. Even after he pulled Zhang Sun and made a prompt decision to blend into the crowd, there was no second fatal arrow. Judging from all the signs, it was very likely that the person who shot the arrow had difficulty moving. Once he left his line of sight, there would be no danger. Coincidentally, his movements were also very inconvenient. But he has a good wheelchair. In the next moment, the wheelchair spun 9 times and Ning Chen's figure quickly moved forward. He wasn't worried that there would be arrows at this time. It was always difficult to hit a moving target with arrows. That woman didn't die in vain. At the very least, he could tell the exact direction the arrow came from through the woman's body. This person's arrow was too fast. If not, he would have to go to the underworld to make a judgment based on his own corpse. There weren't many places in the imperial city that could overlook the Lingyan Pavilion. Based on the direction the arrow came from, it wasn't difficult to determine the location. The only thing he had some misgivings about was just how strong was this person's Dao protector. Under the cold moonlight, a black light flashed in the night. Mr. Liu of the academy was a genius in craftsmanship. After the black wheelchair was driven by his genuine qi, it moved much faster than expected. Ning Chen looked at the pagoda in front of him with a cold glint in his eyes. There were very few people who believed in Buddhism in Great Xia, and he didn't believe in it either. Buddha talked about the afterlife, but he cared more about this life. If there was an afterlife, he hoped that the world would be peaceful. The pagoda was very tall and there was light. It wasn't candlelight, but the moonlight reflected by the saraira. It was said that a long time ago, Buddhism was once popular on this land. After the eminent monks of that time passed away, they might leave behind saraira. The existence of this pagoda was even older than the history of the Great Xia dynasty. Although the great Xia dynasty didn't believe in Buddhism, they would still renovate this ancient pagoda over the years. Soon, Ning Chen arrived at the bottom of the pagoda. He looked up, wondering if he should go up or wait. In the end, he decided to go up. If this dead person stayed up there for the whole night, wouldn't he have to wait for the whole night like a fool? Was he a fool? He obviously wasn't. Ning Chen hated stairs the most. Things like wheels weren't suitable for climbing up and down. The pagoda was very tall, so there were naturally many stairs. It took him a lot of effort. The wind at the top of the pagoda was very strong. Ning Chen squinted his eyes slightly. He didn't know when he had developed this habit. There were two people waiting in front of him. One was a man, and the other was disabled. The man was holding a flute in his hand. When he saw the young man, he frowned. The disabled man turned around with difficulty and grinned. His ugly face made people feel disgusted. He looked strange, and his combination was also strange. Ning Chen thought to himself, how could he catch up with him and Zhang Sun when he was disabled like this? He couldn't move his legs, but the person in front of him seemed to only be able to move his hands. It was really terrifying for such a person to be able to practice such archery. As for the man holding the flute, Ning Chen didn't pay much attention to him at first. Here, the biggest threat to him was the bow in the disabled man's hand. The man holding the flute didn't give off any oppressive aura. Unless a powerful warrior reached the Xiantian realm, it was very difficult for them to completely conceal their aura. The more powerful a person was, the more oppressive they would be. The green bow in the disabled man's hand was too dangerous. He didn't know if his guess was true. If the disabled man could shoot that kind of terrifying arrow endlessly, there was no need to fight today. Ning Chen slowly pulled out his ink sword from behind the wheelchair. Today, he had to get rid of this terrifying enemy. He didn't want to be shot to death by a silent arrow on the street. The man's face was also very serious. He could feel danger from the young man's sword. This was not the wasteland, and his strength was greatly reduced. At the scene, only the disabled man kept smiling. His smile was twisted and perverted. Suddenly, he drew the bow and nocked an arrow. The arrow was like a shooting star, instantly arriving in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen blocked with his sword. With a clang, the arrowhead drew a spark and was blown away by the ink sword. The disabled man's smile became even brighter. His ugly face was twisted, and he looked a bit scary. Ning Chen's expression didn't change. This kind of arrow was no threat to him. The north wind on the top of the tower was getting colder and colder. The cold moon hanging high in the sky shone on the three people, making this life and death battle even colder. The man held the flute in his hand and put it near his mouth. Ning Chen was shocked. He subconsciously felt that something was wrong. He moved his ink sword and rushed forward. Whoosh! Another arrow came and blocked his path. He had no choice but to turn his sword back to block it. Woo! The next moment, a low and gloomy sound of the flute was heard above the pagoda. The decadent sound made people's minds sink in an instant. The devilish sound was soul-sucking and went straight to the heart. Ning Chen turned his right hand and the ink sword mercilessly pierced into his leg. He felt a sharp pain and forcibly dispelled the dizziness in his head. However, at this moment, an arrow more dazzling than the moon arrived in an instant. The cold wind at the end of the arrow was hissing, piercing people's minds. I've been waiting for you. Ning Chen's eyes were cold. He didn't dodge. In front of him, a big black umbrella opened and instantly covered the dazzling arrow. Boom! With a terrible bang, the arrow hit the big black umbrella and created the most horrible sound wave. The three people present only felt a sharp pain in their ears and their blood kept surging in their bodies. The wheelchair was shaken by the huge force and only stopped when it was 10 meters away. The big black umbrella was completely destroyed and a big hole was blown out. However, the terrible arrow also lost its power and fell down powerlessly. Ning Chen didn't feel sorry at all. He pulled the mechanism that fixed the big black umbrella from the sides of the wheelchair with his left hand and then threw it aside casually. He could ask Elder Lu to install another one when he returned to the academy. There was nothing to feel sorry about. He was lucky to be able to block the arrow. The mechanism structure of the wheelchair was proposed by him. The design method and materials were prepared by Elder Lu. Neither of them was a gentleman. Therefore, the biggest function of the wheelchair was to trick people and save their lives. Well, the mechanism is used up. We don't owe each other anything. Let's start again and have a fair fight. Ning Chen moved the wheelchair 10 meters forward and said lightly. The man stepped forward, put away the flute in his hand, and then pulled out a machete from behind. He looked at the young man in front of him coldly and accepted the challenge. Man, Ning Chen praised him. The ink sword in his hand trembled and frost condensed with a touch of coldness. He liked this kind of gentleman's behavior. The man moved first. The machete was like a moon, and the fiercest killing light flashed. He knew his strength, which was not supposed to be his strength. Among the three of them, he was the fastest. The man was very good at using his own machete. They were people from the grassland and had their own machete since they were young. They had been with each other for many years and had become close friends. Facing the machete, Ning Chen raised his sword and swung it down. It was simple and pure without any moves. However, it was this simple sword or machete that made the man's expression change drastically. He realized that he could not avoid it no matter what he did. He did not know that this was the young man's best move. A line in front of the chest was a forbidden area. Ning Chen had chopped firewood in the academy for more than 2 months. He had swung this move thousands of times. It was so familiar that it was almost engraved in his bones. The man could not avoid it and could only block it with his machete. The machete and sword met. With a bang, the two of them sank 3 inches into the ground. Whoosh! A black light flashed between the two of them. The man's eyes narrowed, and a touch of disbelief flashed across his face. You, the man fell down. The arrow in his chest was still trembling. He did not understand. Didn't Ning Chen say that they would start again and have a fair fight? Fool, I lied to you. The corners of Ning Chen's mouth curled into a cold arc as he spoke. What was fair? You die, I live. That was fair. In the world, the most untrustworthy thing was your enemy. If you knew that it was your enemy and still believed it, what else could you be if you were not a fool? Now, there are only 2 of us left. How do you think we should settle this? Ning Chen moved his wheelchair forward and looked at the cripple in front of him. There was no suspense in the rest of the battle. The bow was a long-range weapon after all. At such a close distance, he would not give the cripple a chance to draw his bow again. Hee. The cripple laughed strangely. He did not beg for mercy, nor did he shoot the arrow in his hand. He grabbed the railing on the top of the tower with his right hand and used his strength to break the railing. Then, his body fell backward like a kite with a broken string. The Zhao clan will come for you sooner or later. The person who fell did not have any reluctance to leave the world. Only his curse-like voice echoed in the night sky, lingering for a long time. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. He did not know who the Zhao clan was, but he knew that he would survive today. The saraira on the pagoda was still emitting a gentle light. Buddha said that if you put down the butcher's knife, you would become a Buddha. But who would have thought that if you put down the butcher's knife, you would only become a ghost? It was still the same sentence. If there was another life, he hoped that the world would be peaceful. Chapter 50. It was already halfway through the night, and the cold wind was even more bone-chilling. Ning Chen faintly felt that his legs were starting to hurt again. He couldn't help but feel irritated, and went down the pagoda with a gloomy face. The pagoda was 10 zhang tall, and it couldn't be more dead. The green bow and arrow box were scattered not far away, emitting a cold light. "This is a good bow," Ning Chen commented. Actually, he didn't know what kind of bow was good, and what kind of bow wasn't. He only judged based on his feelings. This bow almost shot him through the heart last time, and this time, it almost shot him through the heart again. It could be said that there was a deep hatred between them. The material of the bow wasn't like wood, but a kind of metal that he couldn't understand. There were too many strange things in this world, and he couldn't distinguish them. The inside of the green bow was engraved with the 2 words, "Broken Death." It was simple and grand, and seemed to be quite old. It should be worth a lot of money. From today onwards, this green bow was his, and the arrow box was also his. The way back was a bit far, and Ning Chen didn't want to waste his energy, so he walked slowly. The wheelchair squeaked on the stone road, and it was a bit harsh, but it was better than the emptiness and loneliness. Dark clouds gradually covered the moon, and this damned sky seemed to be about to snow again. It was endless, and it made people unhappy. Occasionally, there would be extremely soft sounds behind him, and Ning Chen knew that there were people following him, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 people. He was too lazy to pay attention to these. As long as no one killed him, it was fine. Among the people following him, there must be Zhang Sun's spies. If he accidentally hurt the wrong person, it would be a big joke. In this world, there weren't many people he was afraid of, but unfortunately, Zhang Sun was one of them. The cold wind was especially cold. Ning Chen walked on the road and unconsciously trembled, and the hand holding the wheelchair was slightly stiff. "Don't tell me I'm going to vomit blood again." The stuffiness in his chest made his bad mood even worse. He had already drunk the medicine last night, and the effect seemed to be very normal. 800 taels of silver was lost. Ling Yan Pavilion was already very quiet, and the women of the brothel also needed to rest. Everyone said that prostitutes were heartless, and actors were unloyal, but the truly heartless ones were these self-proclaimed romantic brothel patrons. What Ning Chen hated the most in his life were these so-called romantic scholars. Scholars were romantic, but behind them were the tears and blood of women. Du Shenyang jumped into the river, Chen Yuanyuan became a monk, Lu Ru hung herself, and Li Shishir would rather die than submit. He wasn't a nationalistic youth, but if anyone dared to call themselves a romantic scholar in front of him, he would definitely kick them in the face. Young Master Ning. At this moment, a beautiful figure slowly walked out from under the moonlight. It was Moon Spirit who he had just parted with. "It's already so late and you're still awake?" Ning Chen's face revealed a trace of surprise as he asked. Moon Spirit looked thoughtfully in the direction of the pagoda and replied softly, "I heard some noises just now, so I came out to take a look." Ning Chen understood that it must have been caused by the collision between the arrow and the big black umbrella. He didn't expect that Moon Spirit, who was so far away, would notice it. It seemed that what happened tonight would soon spread throughout the imperial city. Enhe's night was very beautiful, but the weather was not on his side, and it gradually started to snow. "Let me send you back," Ning Chen said, worried about Moon Spirit's health. Moon Spirit didn't refuse. She lived not far from here, less than a quarter of an hour's walk. Ning Chen turned the wheelchair himself. He didn't let Moon Spirit help him push it. The night was too cold, and the wheelchair would be very cold. Cough, cough. The falling snow was very beautiful and cold. Moon Spirit was wearing a lot of clothes, but she still kept coughing softly. It seemed that they were a little similar. They both didn't like snow. After knowing each other for a few days, Ning Chen found that he knew almost nothing about this strange woman. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Miss Ling, where is your hometown?" "North." Moon Spirit pointed to the north and said softly. Ning Chen smiled. He knew it was the north that day. When they met, it was in the north of Great Xia. However, since Moon Spirit didn't want to tell him, he didn't ask anymore. Young Master Ning, what's your lifelong dream? Moon Spirit looked at the distant north, and a flash of color flashed in her eyes. It was so bright that people didn't dare to look directly at it. Ning Chen fell silent. This question was too difficult for him to answer. He used to want to leave the palace, and then he left. Now he was trying his best to go back. If he really had to say something, it would be to be able to stand up one day. It was a very simple wish, but it seemed unattainable. What about you? Ning Chen didn't answer, but asked back. The world is peaceful, and the people are rich. When Moon Spirit said this, there was no pretense on her beautiful face. She was pure and noble, untainted by a speck of dust. Ning Chen became even more silent. He wasn't as good as her. He always pushed the world's peace to the next life because he knew he couldn't do it. This was a dream that couldn't be blasphemed, but it was also the most difficult dream to realize. They arrived at the pleasant inn. Moon Spirit went up to rest. Ning Chen watched her go up the stairs, then turned his wheelchair and left. He sincerely hoped that her dream could be realized. After returning to Lingyan Pavilion, Ning Chen sat in front of the bed and looked at the broken death bow in his hand. He immediately circulated his martial arts and gently pulled the bowstring. The bow was very hard, but it didn't move at all. He had no choice but to continue to exert force and channel his vital energy into the bow. However, he felt a majestic suction force, and the vital energy in his body was instantly reduced by 30%. No wonder. Ning Chen frowned and muttered to himself. This bow was indeed strange. It consumed too much vital energy, and an ordinary person couldn't even pull it open once. Currently, he could only pull it open twice at most. This thing could be used to save his life, but he couldn't use it every time he fought. Otherwise, he would be exhausted to death. Putting the broken death bow behind his back, Ning Chen closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. He had been fighting too many times recently, and getting injured was like eating a meal. If he didn't take the time to heal himself now, he would be in for a treat the next time he fought. The night passed quickly, but the first rays of dawn didn't come. Light snow fell slowly, dyeing the entire sky of the imperial city a beautiful white. Outside the Lingyan Pavilion, Ning Chen had left his room very early. He turned his wheelchair and came to Yin He's side. Looking at the floating snow on the ice, he gradually couldn't help but fall in love with this pure and beautiful scenery. If it weren't for his legs, the snow wouldn't be so bad. The snow in the imperial city wasn't heavy, and it didn't affect the people's travel. People came and went, bustling with activity. It was simple and peaceful, but it spoke volumes about life. After a night of thinking, Ning Chen finally knew how to contact Zhang Sun and make Emperor Xia and the Western Palace apprehensive so that they wouldn't dare to act brazenly. Unfortunately, he had to leave without saying goodbye again this time. Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and came to the top of the pagoda. From the top of the pagoda, he looked at the imperial city in the distance. Then, he took out the broken death bow behind him, drew the bow, knocked an arrow, and shot at the Weiyang Palace. Whoosh! The iron arrow, reinforced by the vital energy of the scripture of life, was wrapped in a silver light. It pierced through the obstacles of the void and shot at the Weiyang Palace like a shooting star. In the Weiyang Palace, Qing Ning's expression changed drastically. She looked at the silver light shooting towards her from the sky. Her figure dashed 30 feet away and pulled out the long sword closest to her. Soon after, she stomped her feet and flew up, blocking the frightening arrow light with her sword. With a bang, the sword couldn't withstand the huge force and shattered into pieces. Qing Ning's eyes narrowed, and her delicate hand reached for the iron arrow in the silver light. Suddenly, Qing Ning's body shook. After grabbing the iron arrow, she turned around and flew towards Zhang Sun's palace. Behind the iron arrow, a moon-shaped jade pendant swayed. Qing Ning's heart was heavy. She knew that the Empress had left it for that kid to save his life. Very few people knew about it, so no one would use it to threaten him. In that case, this jade pendant must have been shot by Ning Chen himself. The situation was urgent, so Qin Ning didn't have time to think about why he had such ability. She was worried that he was in danger and urgently needed her and the Empress to save him. Zhang Sun had just woken up not long ago, so the first prince wasn't in the palace. The ninth princess was also confined because of Ning Chen, so no one would come to greet her early in the morning. As for the concubines in the palace, they would only come after breakfast. Qin Ning didn't knock on the door and directly pushed it open. This caused Zhang Sun, who was still dressing up, to frown. She wasn't blaming her, but she knew Qin Ning's personality. If there wasn't something important, she wouldn't be so rude. What's wrong? Zhang Sun continued to dress up and asked calmly. Qin Ning quickly walked forward and handed over the arrow in her hand. Her expression was full of worry. Seeing the jade pendant on the arrow, Zhang Sun's hand paused. After thinking for a moment, she stood up and said with a serious expression, "Come, follow me out of the palace." "Empress, could something have happened to Ning Chen?" Qin Ning asked worriedly. "No, he wants to tell me that he has something urgent to see me about," Zhang Sun shook her head and said. At the same time, the Western Palace and the Heavenly Mandate Palace both reacted. That arrow was so dazzling that the hidden cultivators in the palace had all seen it. But no matter what, they were too slow this time. No matter how fast the spy's information was, it still took time. When Ning Chen's action reached the palace, Zhang Sun and Qin Ning had already left the palace. After Ning Chen shot that arrow, he stayed on the pagoda and didn't move. He was waiting for Zhang Sun to come. Sure enough, after waiting for a while, a carriage slowly came from afar. There were no guards, no maids, and no eunuchs. Only Qin Ning accompanied it. Zhang Sun's trust was a bit heavy. After the experience of being assassinated, she still dared to leave the palace like this. This made the burden in his heart even heavier. However, he stood so high, and with Qin Ning's existence, no one in the world could hurt Zhang Sun unless they were in the innate realm. The higher he stood, the farther he could see. Naturally, the arrow in his hand could also shoot far. Zhang Sun's carriage arrived quickly. There were many spies of Weiyang Palace outside the palace. It was easy to determine his location. The carriage stopped under the pagoda. Qin Ning accompanied Zhang Sun up the pagoda and saw Ning Chen sitting in a wheelchair at a glance. "Your Highness, Sister Qin Ning." They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Ning Chen didn't know what to say. He grinned and greeted them. Seeing Ning Chen in a wheelchair, Qin Ning's heart ached. She almost cried. She didn't care that Zhang Sun was present. She walked up and gently slapped his head. "Humph!" Beside them, Zhang Sun snorted coldly. He couldn't bear it. At the same time, he was dissatisfied and angry with this guy. Time was tight. Ning Chen didn't dare to delay. He turned his wheelchair forward and handed over the letter in his hand. "Your Highness, this letter has too many implications. I had no choice but to ask you to come out." Zhang Sun took the letter and glanced at the torn wax on it. She said lightly, "Have you read it?" This was the special wax of a general in the barracks. It wouldn't be used unless it was extremely important. Tearing open a military letter without permission was also a capital offense. Ning Chen scratched his head embarrassedly. If he didn't read it, how would he know the seriousness of the matter? Zhang Sun didn't make a fuss. If she really did, this guy had committed too many mistakes. Even if he died 100 times, it wouldn't be too many. Zhang Sun opened the letter and glanced at it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Immediately, her face darkened. What a Beiwu Marquis. Chapter 51. The letter couldn't be fake. There was a general's seal at the end of the letter, but whether the contents of the letter were true or false had too much implications. Jiang Xuan's hand, which was holding the letter, turned pale. His expression was extremely ugly, and he could not believe the contents of the letter. If this was true, then there would be a huge earthquake in Great Xia. Ning Chen sat there, not daring to make a sound. His mission of delivering the letter had been completed, and the remaining matters were not something he could do. Ning Chen, you can't stay in the imperial city. Where are you prepared to go? Zhang Sun put away the letter and made a prompt decision. Qing Ning was shocked and was about to speak when Zhang Sun reached out to stop her. Now that Ning Chen knew of this secret, Emperor Xia would definitely not let him off. This time, even she was powerless to stop him. Qing Ning glanced at Ning Chen and a trace of pity appeared on her beautiful face. The latter had risked his life to deliver the letter from afar. It was too cruel for him to leave just like that. Ning Chen grinned, indicating that it was fine. He turned to look at Zhang Sun. Nyang, I need to make a trip to the east. It might be a bit troublesome to leave the city. Can you give me a ride? Yes. Jiang Xuan's eyes flashed and he nodded in agreement. Ning Chen was right. It was indeed difficult for him to leave the city. Emperor Xia would not allow someone who might be out of control to leave the imperial city. If he wanted to leave, he would only be a corpse. The three of them descended from the pagoda, and then they sat in the carriage and quickly headed towards the city gates. In the shadows, a wisp of anxiety appeared on the face of a shadow guard, but he didn't dare to stop them. Emperor Xia's order was to stop Ning Chen within the imperial city and kill him without mercy once he stepped out of the city. However, with the Empress accompanying him, they were unable to stop him, and they did not dare to make a move. If there was anyone capable of resisting the might of Emperor Xia, Zhang Sun would definitely be one of them. No one could ignore the influence of Jiang Xuan's lineage in the Great Xia, not even Emperor Xia. The carriage heading east continued to move forward. After Zhang Sun sent Ning Chen out of the city, he stepped down and let the latter drive the carriage away. When the guards at the east gate saw that it was the Empress, they were so scared that they didn't dare to make a sound, let alone check who was in the carriage. Inside the imperial city, the shadow guards watched as the carriage left, but they were powerless and did not dare to step out of the city gate. The reason was simple. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning were standing in front of the city. Let's go back. Seeing that the carriage had already disappeared before his eyes, Zhang Sun called out to Qing Ning before turning around and walking towards the city. Qing Ning sighed inwardly and followed him. She could no longer help him. He had to walk his own path in the future. Ning Chen drove the carriage all the way to the east, temporarily avoiding all the spies. The first thing he needed to do was to go to Sword City and look for Mu Qingxue. That was what was truly dangerous. After all, there were still rules in the imperial city of Great Xia. Even Emperor Xia had to consider the influence of many parties and could not be too unbridled. However, Sword City was different. It was a place without any rules, and the only rule was the sword in one's hand. The strong were respected. This was the truest portrayal of Sword City. Before Mu Qingxue, there were only 5 Xiantian realm experts in the world. However, the true experts gathered in Sword City. This was a fact that even the 5 Xiantian realm experts could not deny. There was a sword in Sword City that had been battered by the wind and rain for many years, but it had never been unsheathed. This sword was Sword City itself, a forbidden area where there might be a terrifying existence that surpassed the Xiantian realm. And now, another Xiantian realm expert had appeared in Sword City, becoming the 6th Xiantian realm expert in the world. This caused Sword City's prestige to rise to the peak. One had to know that even the Eternal Night sect, which had existed for countless years, only had 2 Xiantian realm experts. As for the Great Xia, which had been invincible for thousands of years, there was only 1 Xiantian realm expert. In Sword City, there were many sword scars. It was said that the Xiantian realm expert left these scars behind when he practiced his sword. Each of the sword scars was filled with incomparably powerful sword intent. This was an irresistible temptation to swordsmen in the world. The Xiantian realm expert in Sword City did not stop the swordsmen from all over the world. 10 years ago, he even took in 3 talented young people. 10 years later, the weakest of the 3 had reached the 9th realm, and the strongest had even taken the crucial half-step. Once the opportunity came, it was very likely that he would take the last half-step and become the 7th Xiantian realm expert in the world. However, other than the 3 of them, no one in Sword City had ever seen that Xiantian realm expert. They could only feel the incomparably powerful sword intent from Sword City. Even though its sharpness was restrained, it still made all the swordsmen in the world submit to it. No one knew how terrifying this sword would be when it was unsheathed. Would it really be able to match or even surpass the Xiantian realm? Ning Chen's future was destined not to be smooth. Mu Qingxue had already reached the Xiantian realm, an existence that was different from mortals. Xiantian realm, another way to describe it was as a heavenly being. A heavenly being. This was not a realm that mortals could understand. Xiantian realm experts rarely took action. At most, they could only be used as a deterrent. Ning Chen only wanted an answer this time. Even if he knew it was impossible, he had to go. The carriage ran wildly in the wilderness without stopping. Snowflakes drifted in the air, and the carriage's tracks quickly disappeared. This trip to Sword City would take at least 10 days. In these 10 days, he had to do everything he could to increase his strength and protect himself. He did not want to be killed by those lunatics in Sword City before he could even see Mu Qingxue. Swordsmen were powerful existences, and they were the most difficult to get along with in the world. Just like the sword consecrator, he had the strangest temper in the palace. In the palace of Great Xia, Zhang Sun, who had already returned to the palace, went directly to the Heavenly Mandate Palace to meet Emperor Xia. On the Dragon Throne, Emperor Xia had already received the news from the Shadow Guards and knew what had happened in the Imperial City. "Empress, what's the matter?" Emperor Xia did not intend to expose the matter and asked seriously. Although Ning Chen's life and death were important, it was not enough to change his relationship with the Empress. "Your Majesty, this is a letter from the northern borderline." Zhang Sun stepped forward and handed over the letter in his hand. Emperor Xia frowned and took the letter. After opening it, he quietly read it. Bang! The next moment, Emperor Xia was so angry that he slammed the table and stood up. At this moment, an extremely hurried voice came from outside the main hall, announcing the arrival of a disciple. "Your Majesty, bad news. The 8th prince was assassinated on his way back to the palace. He is seriously injured and unconscious. His life is in danger." What? The successive bad news caused Emperor Xia's body to sway and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered and fell down in front of the Dragon Throne. "Quickly call for an imperial physician." Zhang Xuan's expression changed and he immediately shouted. "Yes." The eunuch who came in to report was frightened and hastily went out to pass down the order. At the same time, at the northern gate of the Imperial City, Moon Spirit sat in a carriage and left. The old woman sat to the side with faint bloodstains on her clothes. "How is it?" Moon Spirit coughed a few times and asked. "His heart is broken. He won't live past today." The old woman replied. "Very good." Moon Spirit nodded and calmly said. Originally, she did not need to personally come here, but this matter involved her future plans and she could not afford to make any mistakes. Thus, she had to be careful. The carriage was quiet. The old woman thought for a moment and softly said, "Young miss, this subordinate still has something to tell you." "Speak." Moon Spirit indifferently said. According to the news from noble consort Wan, the youth who was happily chatting with young miss was Ning Chen. As she spoke, the old woman's expression became somewhat unsightly. She had only just received this news, but it was too late. Moon Spirit frowned and a trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. She had truly been too careless. Unexpectedly, she had never suspected him. However, that day in Fallen Moon City, when she had taken Ning Chen's pulse, the latter's pulse definitely did not belong to a eunuch. Where is he now? Moon Spirit's expression turned cold as she coldly asked. He's already headed east. The old woman replied. Send people to chase after him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. Moon Spirit ruthlessly said. Yes. The old woman respectfully accepted the order. Ning Chen did not know that the woman who had been happily chatting with him the day before was actually willing to risk everything to kill him. A person's emotions were so fragile at this moment. In terms of position, they were worthless. Fortunately, snow fell in time and covered the carriage's tracks, slowing down the chase. Within the carriage, Ning Chen closed his eyes and rested. He wanted to break through to the 5th grade natal realm, but unfortunately, after a few attempts, he had no choice but to give up. Right now, he was only a paper's distance away from the 5th grade natal realm. However, this paper's distance had forcibly stopped him in his tracks. He was not a genius, so encountering a bottleneck was a very normal thing. For this kind of matter, being impatient was useless. If he forcefully broke through, it was very likely that he would go berserk due to his unstable state of mind. On the path of martial arts, if he did not advance, he would fall back. If he failed to break through, it would leave behind a hidden danger. If he wanted to break through again in the future, it would be almost impossible. Right now, the two true essence cyclones in his body were about the same size. However, if he really fought, there would still be a certain gap. The first page of the life scroll that he cultivated was the foundation of his martial arts. The second page of the life scroll's effects were much worse. The main reason was that it lacked the tempering to break through to the next realm. Moreover, the second page of the life scroll's techniques that he could not cultivate now made him gnash his teeth in hatred. This kind of feeling was like having a large pile of silver in front of him, but someone told him that the silver belonged to his eldest grandson. This was the only move recorded in the life scroll. He had been practicing it all this time, but his progress was very slow. The cost of using this move was a bit excessive, but it also had its unique and extraordinary aspects. Once he mastered it, his foundation would completely transform. As for the technique on the second page of the life scroll, after reading it many times, he still could not find its name. However, according to its attributes, he casually gave it a few names: Dust Scroll, Earth Scroll, Mud Scroll. Of course, after some consideration, he still felt that the Dust Scroll was slightly better. The last two names, he felt that something was wrong. Every time the Dust Scroll was activated, it could control the surrounding dust and sand. However, he had only cultivated for a short period of time, so he was still unable to control it skillfully. This scroll's attributes were relatively heavy, so it was much slower to activate compared to the life scroll. If he wanted to use it earlier, he would need to double up on his cultivation. Neigh, neigh, neigh. Suddenly, the galloping horse neighed and raised its front leg, almost flipping the entire carriage over. Chapter 52. There was a huge gully in front of them. It looked like someone had cut it with a sword. It was difficult to move forward. Ning Chen got out of the carriage and walked towards the gully in his wheelchair. But he felt an extremely strong will coming towards him. It made his blood boil. Ning Chen was shocked. How could there be such a strong cultivator in the world who could imprint his will in the world and not dissipate for so long? He had seen many cultivators at the peak of the 9th rank. Qin Ning, Xia Miaoyu, and even God's Son were all at that level. They were the strongest among them. But he knew that none of them could reach that level. Only a Xiantian cultivator could have such earth-shattering power. The gully had been there for a long time. The dust had turned black. In the world, Only the supreme sword in Sword City could split the world with a single sword. Ning Chen felt even more pressured. Everyone knew that the sword in Sword City hadn't reached the Xiantian level. But now it seemed that it wasn't because it didn't have the talent, but because it didn't care. This sword showed that the sword in Sword City had already surpassed the limits of mortals. Even if it was bound by a physical body, it couldn't block that invincible sword intent. Ning Chen, who came from a foreign land, couldn't understand how a person's sword could reach such a terrifying level. It was no longer a person, but a real sword. A sword that could compete with the world. No wonder all the swordsmen in the world only saw a sword in Huang City. The ink sword behind the wheelchair was trembling. It wanted to crawl in front of the supreme sword intent. Ning Chen held the ink sword and injected some vital energy into it to suppress the sword's trembling. Ink sword, since you're with me, you can't worship anyone or any sword. With a clang, the ink sword stopped trembling, as if it was responding to its master's command. Ning Chen got back into the carriage and took a detour. He didn't have the qualifications to cross the gully, but that day wasn't far away. He swore. 10 days later, Ning Chen's carriage was very close to Sword City. At the same time, a piece of news that shocked the entire Xia dynasty gradually spread. The 8th prince was dead. Among the 19 princes and princesses of the great Xia dynasty, there were only 4 people who had a chance to compete for the throne of Emperor Xia. The first prince was naturally one of them. The other 3 were the 3rd prince, the 8th prince, and the 10th prince. The 4 princes had already been bestowed the title of prince, and the 8th prince was known as the virtuous prince. He was the most likely person to inherit the throne after the first prince. Who would have thought that such a person would actually be assassinated? The incomparably valiant palm strike had completely shattered his heart meridians. Not long after returning to the palace, he had died from his injuries. Some people noticed that there was a conspiracy going on. Among the 4 princes, the first prince had the most hope. However, the first prince had always been magnanimous, upright, and distant. He did not have much attachment to the position of emperor. As such, there were only 3 people who truly cared about the throne. The 3 of them were wary of each other. They didn't dare to make any big moves. Everyone was worried that once they lost their momentum, the other 2 would join forces to suppress them. That was why it was said that a triangle was always the most stable relationship. But now, with the 8th prince's death, the triangle that was wary of each other instantly collapsed. The competition for the throne would definitely heat up very quickly. The remaining 2 no longer cared about who would join forces with who. It was just the east wind suppressing the west wind, or the west wind suppressing the east wind. Whoever was stronger would be able to suppress the other. As for the battle between the victor and the first prince, that was a matter for the future. While the great Xia dynasty was shaking, in the distant west, the Son of God had passed through the number 1 shrine of Evernight and arrived at a vast and boundless sea of nothingness. Silver light reverberated between heaven and earth, forming a world of its own. Evernight Scripture. The Son of God stretched out his hand, and an ancient scripture flickering with a black brilliance slowly descended from the void. It was as black as ink, and it was like a black hole that devoured the surrounding light. What are you looking for? At this time, a mighty figure walked over. His domineering aura caused the entire void to distort. Martial Lord. The Son of God bowed respectfully and said, "I'm looking for information about the heavenly scripture." Oh. It seems you've gained something from this trip. The martial lord's eyes flashed with a strange light. The Evernight sect had many young champions, but he was most satisfied with Jun Shaoqing. He was neither arrogant nor rash, and he was persistent in doing things, just like his father in the past. I sense the aura of the life scripture, the Son of God said. Oh. It's actually that. Hearing this news, the martial lord couldn't remain calm. Although the life scripture wasn't the strongest, it was the most special one. Of the 10 heavenly scriptures, life was the beginning, God was the venerable, chaos was the change, and nothingness was the end. The other 6 scriptures each had their own abilities, and they were the essence of the heavens and earth. The Son of God opened the Evernight scripture. This ancient scripture that recorded the countless years since the creation of Evernight erupted with a dazzling black light that devoured the heavens and earth. It was extremely shocking. The Evernight scripture was the light scripture of the 10 heavenly scriptures. Everything, including everything, was recorded within it. In the dazzling light, 10 large characters lined up in order. Life, light, moon, travel, earth, and chaos were already lit up. As for the remaining 4, they were still dim and couldn't be seen clearly. The martial lord looked at the 6 bright characters in the sky and narrowed his eyes. He said in surprise, "I didn't expect that 6 heavenly scriptures had already appeared." The Son of God nodded and said, "Of the 6 heavenly scriptures, the light and moon scriptures are in the Evernight sect, the travel scripture is in Sword City, and the chaos scripture is in the hands of that woman from the northern Meng imperial court. The whereabouts of the remaining 2 scriptures are unknown. However, I sense the aura of the life scripture in the wedding procession of the Grand Xia. Although it was very brief, it can't be wrong. Is there any news of the earth scripture?" the martial lord asked. "No." The Son of God shook his head. When the earth scripture had appeared, it had been too far away from the Evernight sect. Furthermore, it had been within the Grand Xia. It would have been very difficult for the Evernight sect's experts to arrive in time. The whereabouts of the other 2 heavenly scriptures were unknown, which wasn't good news for the Evernight sect. After the Evernight sect had created the world, the 10 heavenly scriptures had been scattered throughout the world. The Evernight sect had obtained 5 of them, and their power had been unparalleled for a time. However, as time passed, other than the Evernight divine scripture, the other 4 heavenly scriptures had been lost. Even the moon scripture that had been placed in the first shrine had only been retrieved 100 years ago. The Evernight sect's decline 1,000 years ago wasn't unrelated to the loss of the heavenly scriptures. Retrieving the remaining heavenly scriptures was extremely important to the Evernight sect. Is it possible to find the whereabouts of the earth scripture in the Evernight divine scripture? Asked the martial lord. The Son of God waved his hand, and his true chi surged out and entered the Evernight divine scripture. After a long time, he shook his head and said, "I can't find it." The martial lord frowned. Ever since the chaos scripture had appeared, the Evernight divine scripture's usefulness had become more and more limited. Unfortunately, that woman from the northern Meng imperial court still had some value. The Son of God narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. "Martial lord, I almost forgot to mention that the underworld child has also awakened." "Oh. That rumored variable from the netherworld hell?" The martial lord's expression turned cold. It seemed like this really was a sign of chaos. Even that madman had awakened. The underworld child and the ghost woman were a pair of variables from the netherworld hell. They were extremely powerful, and when they joined hands, they could contend against a Xiantian expert. However, this generation's underworld child was a madman. Whether it was the degree of absurdity or his talent, he far surpassed any of the previous underworld children. In this world, the only person who could contend against the underworld child was the ghost woman. Apart from her, even a Xiantian expert would find it difficult to kill the underworld child who had come out of the netherworld hell. In this world, there would always be some special people. Their life and death wouldn't be decided simply by strength. The underworld child and the ghost woman came from the netherworld hell. They balanced each other out, but they also complemented each other. Apart from their strength, the most difficult thing to deal with was their nearly unkillable netherworld ghost body. Tomorrow, make a trip to the Sword City in the east. I have already accepted that person's sword-proving battle. However, before that, you should go and fight with the new Xiantian expert in the Sword City. This will help you comprehend the Xiantian realm. As he spoke, the martial lord didn't hide his eagerness for the battle. Warriors were born for battle. The eternal night cult had been silent for too long. If they continued to hide their edge, they would be completely forgotten by the world. The god's son nodded. He had been stuck at the peak of the postliminary realm for a long time. He had vaguely taken a step forward, but he couldn't really take it. He really needed a battle to stimulate himself. On the wasteland, the galloping carriage gradually slowed down. After half a day, an ancient city could be vaguely seen. However, this wasn't the Sword City. Instead, it was the last city in the east of the Great Xia Empire, Matchless City. Matchless City was located on the only road that connected the east and the west. It was extremely prosperous. The walls of the entire ancient city were made of strange ancient wood and metal. Sabers, forks, swords, and halberds had left marks on them. One could vaguely see the fierce battles of the past. Since ancient times, it had been one of the impregnable passes of the Central Plains. No one knew how long it had been there, but it still stood firm and upright in the divine continent. Ning Chen entered the city and casually found an inn to stay in. He had almost run out of money, so he had no choice but to deal with it. Chopping firewood was too slow, so robbing people wasn't too suitable. He could only go out and try his luck. He knew a bit of martial arts, so fighting in a ring wasn't a problem. This wasn't a problem at first, but now it had become a hindrance to his progress. He felt somewhat helpless. Warriors were also humans, and they also needed to eat. Since ancient times, things like rings were quite common. Matchless City naturally didn't lack one. Ning Chen was like a wolf that had seen a fat piece of meat. After seeing it from afar, he rushed there as if his life depended on it. There was a fluttering banner in front of him that had 2 words written on it, ring. In his eyes, this was silver, this was bread. After squeezing through the crowd with great difficulty, Ning Chen didn't say anything and slapped his wheelchair to get up. On the opposite side of the ring was a middle-aged man in green clothes. He had a beard and a jade-like face. It could be seen that he must have been a handsome man when he was young. Even though he was old now, he could still charm many infatuated girls. Ning Chen hated handsome men the most, especially those who were more handsome than him. The middle-aged man looked at the young man who came up and frowned unconsciously. How could he be a cripple? Have you read the rules? The middle-aged man asked worriedly. Rules? Ning Chen was a little dumbfounded. What rules? Wasn't it just fighting in a ring? There were rules. Wait, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He glanced around, and when he saw a spirited young girl vaguely sitting behind the curtain of the ring, his mind went blank. He was careless and forgot that there was a kind of ring in this world called a martial arts competition to find a spouse. Ning Chen grinned and laughed foolishly. He apologized, hee, I came to the wrong place. I'm sorry. No matter if it was true or not, he couldn't stay any longer. It was better to be safe than sorry. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned his wheelchair and was about to go down. There was no way he could earn this money. Otherwise, he would have to pay for it. Wait. At this moment, the young girl behind the gauze curtain stood up. She had a pretty face, but there was a rudeness that made people dislike her. Ning Chen pretended that he didn't hear her. He turned his wheelchair and was about to go down the stairs. I'm calling you. Didn't you hear me? The young girl was furious. She waved the long whip in her hand and slapped it towards Ning Chen. The sudden disaster made Ning Chen a little unhappy. He just came to the wrong place and apologized. Why did he have to be whipped? Even Zhangsun didn't let him be whipped. Why did this woman? Chapter 53. Ning Chen was very angry. Who did he offend? Was it a big mistake to go the wrong way? If it weren't for the fact that she was a girl, he would have beaten her up. He turned his wheelchair and dodged the whip. Ning Chen continued to prepare. He comforted himself that he was a man and couldn't argue with a girl. Slap. The girl became even angrier after her whip missed. The whip in her hand whistled, and she didn't give up. Ning Chen heard the wind in his ears and his body began to tremble. He reached out and grabbed the whip. He endured it and suppressed the anger in his heart. He swung it casually, but he endured it again. She was young and inexperienced, so he couldn't be petty. Slap. He dodged the whip that came flying at him. Slap. He dodged the whip that flew towards him. Slap, slap, slap. After countless whips, Ning Chen finally became angry. He suddenly turned around and stared at the unruly girl in front of him. His anger burned the 9 heavens. You're not done yet. He decided not to endure it any longer. A good man shouldn't fight with a girl. He had enough. He moved his wheelchair and instantly crossed the distance of 3 feet. He flipped his right palm and pressed it toward the girl's chest. The girl was shocked and even angrier. She held the whip with both hands and blocked her chest. However, she couldn't block the huge force. Her blood and chi surged, and she was forced to retreat several steps. Ning Chen still held back, or else this palm wouldn't have just made her retreat a few steps. He was angry, but he didn't lose his mind. He only used 10% of his palm and held back 70%. He only wanted to teach this unruly girl a lesson. The whip in the girl's hand swung again. Slap. It was extremely loud. Ning Chen sneered. If he was hit by this lousy whip, then he was really asking for a beating. He grabbed the incoming whip and pulled it hard. The girl's palm hurt, and the whip immediately fell out of her hand. The gap between their strength couldn't be made up. In her anger, the girl didn't care about anything else. She shouted at the people below, "Beat him. Everyone, 10 taels of silver." The crowd below was excited and rushed up like a tide. 10 taels of silver wasn't a small amount. It was enough to feed an ordinary family for several months. The girl retreated and angrily stared at Ning Chen. She wanted to see how he would embarrass himself. At the side, the middle-aged man frowned, but he didn't stop the young girl from messing around. From the move just now, he could tell that the young man before him wasn't simple. In the center of the arena, Ning Chen looked at the surrounding crowd and sighed softly. Indeed, money makes the world go round. When would he be able to be so generous? There's nothing I can do. With a helpless sigh, Ning Chen fully unleashed his aura. Silver brilliance surged and turned into a huge force that instantly pushed everyone on the stage away. What a powerful foundation. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted. The youth in front of him did not have a high cultivation, but his foundation was exceptionally tyrannical. The strength of his true chi was enough to rival a 5th-stage post-celestial stage expert. After all, level 5 was the first hurdle of martial arts. There was a huge gap between level 4 and level 5. He had never heard of anyone who could have such strong genuine chi at level 4. Ning Chen didn't care about it, but unknowingly, the effect of the life scroll was gradually revealed. Among the 10 scrolls of Heavenly Book, life is the beginning. It was the only scroll that didn't require one to reach the post-celestial stage to cultivate both mental cultivation methods and moves. It was unparalleled in terms of tempering one's foundation. Even the other heavenly books couldn't compare to it. The key to fighting was either to be able to hit or to be able to endure. The key to being able to endure was even simpler. Thick skin, thick flesh, high blood, and resistance to beatings. The life scroll that Mu Qingxue gave him was exactly this. Therefore, Ning Chen received many injuries. Although he lost an arm or a leg, and was crippled, he survived in the end. The middle-aged man was someone who had seen the world, but the girl wasn't. Originally, she only wanted to teach this brat a lesson, but now she changed her mind. Ah da, ah air, ah san, go. Yes, princess. With 3 whooshing sounds, 3 men holding swords appeared on the arena and surrounded Ning Chen. Their expressions were unfriendly. Ning Chen's eyes became serious. When he heard the 2 words, princess, he knew that things were going to be bad. His luck was so bad that he could meet a member of the imperial family while casually fighting. He reckoned that this unruly girl's father was either an idiot or had a screw loose. How could he allow his daughter to cause trouble like this? A princess setting up an arena was too absurd. They were both princesses, but the difference between Xia Miaoyu and this unruly girl was like heaven and earth. Today, he had bumped into great luck. Thinking about the sword, the wind from the swords came. The 3 men attacked with surging genuine qi. They were all experts of the 5th stage realm. Warriors were not as common as cabbages in this world. Experts who could cross the level 5 realm were not everywhere. This unruly girl could summon 3 of them with a casual shout, which really made people feel very uncomfortable. Ning Chen was envious, jealous, and even hateful. But there was nothing he could do. She was a princess, and he was a eunuch. Bah, he wasn't a eunuch. With a clang, the ink sword was unsheathed. It blocked the long sword in one of the men's hands easily. Then it changed its direction and knocked away the second sword. At the same time, the 3rd sword light had arrived in front of him. Ning Chen's left hand's sword fingers trembled. With the help of the dark yellow light, he avoided the sword edge and knocked away the 3rd sword with 2 fingers. After defeating 3 enemies with 1 move, Ning Chen rushed forward. The ink sword was like snow, and it chopped at the nearest man. Facing 3 people together, he was always at a disadvantage. Plus, he didn't have an advantage in cultivation. If he kept being passive, he would be defeated eventually. Clang! Ah San raised his sword to block. When his sword momentum was trapped, the ink sword changed its trajectory again and revealed an opening behind him. Ah San swung the sword at Ada. Ada moved his eyes and stepped back to avoid the ink sword. Air's sword light was reflected in his eyes. The opening became Air's target. Ning Chen's sword momentum was exhausted, so it was hard for him to defend. At the edge of the arena, the middle-aged man was about to stop Air. However, before he opened his mouth, he closed it immediately. Air's sword did not welcome an opening, but a swift and fierce dark arrow. Ning Chen was not the kind of person who would expose his back to his opponents. Especially after his legs were disabled, he didn't like strangers standing behind him. The dark arrow on his back was something that even the wheelchair he retired in earlier had, not to mention this one. Air's sword clashed with the dark arrow, making an ear-piercing sound. After a short moment, the ink sword was chasing after his life. Air's eyes shrank. He instinctively leaned to one side. Then he saw blood splattering everywhere. The ink sword had pierced through his right arm. Clang! The long sword fell. Air's body froze. He couldn't react in time. Ada and San looked angry. They moved their bodies and were about to attack again. However, they were stopped by a calm shout. Stop! It was the middle-aged man who shouted. This battle couldn't continue. Otherwise, the consequences would be hard to deal with. He could tell that the young man in front of him was not a soft-hearted person. That sword attack was obviously real. If the battle continued, someone would definitely fall today. Third uncle. Xia Nianyi was dissatisfied. She didn't understand why her third uncle wanted to stop this battle. Shut up! Yan Qinhuang shouted coldly. Xia Nianyi was startled. Her face was filled with fear. She knew that although her third uncle doted on her, once he was angry, he would not recognize anyone. Even her father didn't dare to provoke him. You, name. Yan Qinhuang walked up and asked seriously. Ning Chen. Ning Chen honestly reported his name. It wasn't that he was stupid, but that he had guessed the other party's identity. The current Xia emperor had 4 brothers. One was Hua Qinhuang in the imperial city, one was Yu Qinhuang in Nanjiang, and the last was the unruly girl's father, Tai Qinhuang, whose fief was in Wushuang city. As for the middle-aged man in front of him, he must be the third-ranked Yan Qinhuang. Yan Qinhuang had no children. He was free and unfettered. He wasn't restricted by power, so he was the freest of the 4 Qinhuang. As for the other 3 Qinhuang, whether it was Yu Qinhuang or Yan Qinhuang, although they had their own fiefs, it was no different from house arrest. The reason was simple. Both Qinhuang's fiefs were overseen by a Marquis of the Xia dynasty. As for Hua Qinhuang, it was needless to say. He had been trapped in the imperial city his entire life. In comparison, Yan Qinhuang was much freer. The Xia emperor was very lenient to this brother of his. Ning Chen knew about Yan Qinhuang because Zhang Sun and Yan Qinhuang had a good relationship. It was said that Zhang Sun had almost been betrothed to Yan Qinhuang by the previous emperor. He didn't ask what the truth was. No one in this world dared to gossip about Zhang Sun. He didn't have the guts. However, he was sure that Zhang Sun trusted Yan Qinhuang. Yan Qinhuang walked up to Ning Chen. After a long time, he asked, "That little eunuch by Wuyo's side?" Ning Chen smiled bitterly and nodded. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get rid of his identity as a eunuch. "You escaped?" Yan Qinhuang continued. "Yes." Ning Chen nodded again. "You, not bad." Yan Qinhuang gave the highest praise. He didn't fight, but that didn't mean he didn't know anything. He understood the current Xia emperor. People like Ning Chen would either be used or die. There was no third result. Ning Chen smiled embarrassedly. Yan Qinhuang is too kind. Yan Qinhuang nodded and turned to look at his unruly niece. "Nienny, apologize." Ning Chen's expression changed. He felt great inside. "Little guy, who asked you to be so arrogant? If he didn't have some skills, he would be lying here today." This Yan Qinhuang was really good. On the other side, Xia Nienny's expression was one of disbelief. She ignored her fear and said, "You want me to apologize to him? Why?" "Because he protected by Ruiyuan of the Xia dynasty. Because he won back 20,000 horses for the Xia dynasty. Because he sacrificed his legs to escort Miaoyu." As he spoke, Yan Qinhuang's expression became colder and colder. The strong pressure made Xia Nienny's face turn pale. She struggled and stepped forward as if her legs were filled with lead. "I'm sorry." Xia Nienny's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. She turned around and her eyes turned red. She was about to cry. Ning Chen felt great, but he also didn't feel good. Now it seemed like this unruly girl was the one who was wronged. He was the victim. It's okay. He decided to accept the apology calmly. Guilt and whatnot really didn't suit him at all. Xia Nienny was so angry that she almost suffered internal injuries. For a moment, she forgot about her grievances and glared at the former. She wished she could eat his flesh. Ning Chen turned his head and didn't look at her. "Why did you look at me and I look at you? You're not good looking." In fact, Xia Nienny was quite pretty. She had delicate features and was a little unruly, but she was young and charming. However, Ning Chen's taste had already been spoiled by Mu Qingxue, Qing Ning, and the others. He wasn't interested in a green apple like Xia Nienny. "Let's go. We've messed around enough. It's time to go back. Ning Chen, you come with us." Yan Qinhuang glanced at the two, then turned and walked off the stage. He walked out of the crowd. Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and followed, ignoring the unruly girl who was still glaring at him. "Little guy, I'll anger you to death." Chapter 54. On the way back, Prince Yen glanced at Ning Chen and Xianyeni, who was dawdling. He frowned and said, "Help push it." Ning Chen and Xianyeni's expressions changed. They were both unwilling, but under Prince Yan's influence, no one dared to object. After Xianyeni got on the wheelchair, her expression was so fierce that it could scare people to death. Ning Chen felt a chill down his spine and felt uncomfortable all over. "I can do it myself." Ning Chen couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was afraid that this unruly girl wouldn't be able to resist stabbing him. At such a close distance, he couldn't dodge even if he wanted to. "Let her push it," Prince Yen rejected. "I'm helping you push it, and you still dare to refuse?" Hearing the unwillingness in Ning Chen's tone, Xianyeni's anger rose. She could refuse, but this guy couldn't. She was already angry enough today. If third uncle wasn't here, she would definitely throw this guy into the river to feed the fish. Ning Chen, shut up. A good man didn't fight with an evil woman. No matter how good one's martial arts were, they were still afraid of being stabbed. Now that they were under someone else's roof, he didn't dare to provoke this unruly girl. If she really stabbed him, who could he reason with? The three of them slowly walked forward. When the commoners in the city saw them, they all retreated and bowed. Prince Yen had a very high prestige in the entire Xia kingdom. His talent and martial arts were extraordinary. If it weren't for his uncompetitive nature, the current emperor's position might have been different. The current Emperor Xia's throne was largely due to Prince Yan's abdication. It was said that the previous Emperor Xia was particularly fond of Prince Yen, who was outstanding in both talent and martial arts. He wanted to make him the crown prince, but Prince Yen refused. This was also why the current Xia emperor was so cold to his own brother, but so kind to Prince Yen. Ning Chen found it hard to believe that this prince who didn't even want the throne would be interested in fooling around with this unruly girl. Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered that he actually didn't know what the arena was for. All these thoughts were just his guesses. Curious, Ning Chen slanted his head and glanced at the unruly girl. He whispered, "Princess, may I ask something?" "What is it?" Xianyeni asked suspiciously. Their relationship wasn't that good, and the word "please" made her feel a bit uncomfortable. This fellow couldn't be plotting something, right? Ning Chen saw the emotions in the unruly girl's eyes, but he didn't argue with her. He wanted to finish his questions first. Compared to his burning desire for gossip, personal grudges could be put aside first. "Why did you set up the arena just now?" Ning Chen thought for a while, but he couldn't figure out how to be tactful. So, he asked directly. "Don't you know?" Xianyeni's expression was a bit strange as she mocked. He didn't even know what was going on, yet he dared to challenge her. What was this fellow's brain made of? He. Hearing the unruly girl's disdain, Ning Chen scratched his head embarrassedly. He must have gone mad from poverty. When he saw the arena, he immediately jumped onto it, afraid that he would run away if he was late. Xianyeni didn't notice Ning Chen's awkward expression. She continued, "Third uncle needs a sword attendant, so he set a rule. Whoever can withstand 10 moves can go with him." After saying that, Xianyeni looked at Ning Chen suspiciously. "Then what did you think it was?" "Nothing." Ning Chen quickly turned his head, not letting the unruly girl see his awkward expression. So the one with a cannon in his head wasn't Imperial Prince Tai, but him. The princess was holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. What was he thinking? He really admired himself for even being able to think of such a nonsensical thing. He thought you were holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. At this time, Imperial Prince Yen indifferently added another blow, causing the two people behind him to be stupefied. Ning Chen had never thought that Imperial Prince Yen had been listening to their conversation the entire time. He also didn't think that Imperial Prince Yen even knew what he was thinking. Could it be that he had written his answer on his face? But how could he say it out loud? How could he say it out loud? However, compared to Ning Chen's anger, Xia Nianyi was so shocked that her mouth couldn't close. In the next moment, she completely exploded. In her anger, she grabbed his neck and viciously squeezed it. Am I so disdainful? She had thought that Ning Chen had said a few words before turning around to cause trouble. She hadn't thought it was actually because he saw her. Ning Chen was having difficulty breathing. He tried to pry Xia Nianyi's hand away while struggling to say, "Princess, princess, don't be impulsive. Imperial Prince Yan was just joking." Xia Nianyi didn't believe him and squeezed even harder. She wanted to strangle this brat to death. The world was big, but it couldn't compare to this guy's courage. He actually dared to disdain her. Ning Chen's face was completely red. He felt that he couldn't breathe. With great effort, he said, "Princess, you are a princess. No matter how stupid I am, I wouldn't let my imagination run wild like this." "Really?" Xia Nianyi suspiciously released her hand. Thinking about it, it made sense. How could someone be so stupid to think like this? No matter what, she was still a princess of the Xia. Her marriage was decided by Emperor Xia. No matter how bad it was, it wouldn't degenerate to the point of holding a martial arts competition to find a groom. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Ning Chen's extremely powerful imagination. For a transmigrator whose worldview was gradually collapsing, it wasn't impossible for him to think that pigs could fly. More importantly, when she went on stage, only a ghost would know her identity as a princess. Cough, cough, it's true. Ning Chen rubbed his throat as he hurriedly nodded. At the same time, he was constantly complaining about Prince Yan. It was fine if you guessed it yourself. Why did you have to say it out loud? What if he couldn't help but beat up this unruly girl? Although he had a lot of opinions about Xia Nianyi, he didn't plan on offending her too much. This was his eldest grandson's niece. Even if he didn't give face to the monk, he still had to give face to the Buddha. Prince Yan smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. After a short interlude, the three continued to walk forward. Prince Yan walked in front with an indifferent expression. Step by step, he walked at a steady pace. His plain green robes fluttered in the wind. He was calm and noble. Truly stylish. Ning Chen sighed in his heart. This Prince Yan wasn't an ordinary person. Just his peerless demeanor left others in the dust. It was no wonder that his eldest grandson was almost betrothed to this talented third master. Unfortunately, Prince Yan had never taken a wife in his entire life. Countless unmarried daughters of court officials had waited foolishly until their hearts were broken. This was a legend of the Grand Xia, a legend who had lived in this era. Compared to him, the Xia emperor who had finally ascended the throne was much less charismatic. He didn't know what had happened between the previous generation of the Grand Xia's princes. Although the current Xia emperor had ascended the throne, he had lost all his brothers. As for Prince Yan, although he had refused the throne, he had received the respect of all the princes. Prince Tai's residence. When the three of them arrived, Prince Tai was sitting in the main seat. Seeing Prince Yan return, he put down his teacup and stood up. Xia Nianyi walked into the hall and saw her father. She immediately ignored Ning Chen and walked over with a sweet smile. "Father, I'm back." Prince Tai chuckled, a doting expression on his face. "You didn't cause any trouble for your third uncle, did you?" "How could I?" "Your daughter is the most obedient," said Xia Nianyi cutely. Ning Chen was speechless. She didn't even blush when she lied. "If you didn't cause any trouble, then how did I end up here? Did I pick you up on the road?" He really wanted to shout that I was the one who caused all this trouble. Prince Tai understood his daughter the best. He knew that at most he could believe a third of what she said. He looked at Prince Yan and asked, "Third brother, Nianyi didn't cause any trouble for you, right?" Xia Nianyi immediately looked at her third uncle. Her meaning was that if he didn't nod, she would cry in front of him. Prince Yen wasn't threatened by the former, but he still shook his head. No. In his eyes, what had happened just now couldn't be considered trouble. At most, it was just two children fighting in a fit of pique. Prince Tai nodded slightly when he heard this. Then, he shifted his gaze towards the young man before him and asked, "You are?" "Ning Chen, Wuyo's subordinate," introduced Prince Yen. "Greetings, Prince Tai." Ning Chen cupped his hands. No need for formalities. Prince Tai was a bit surprised. Why had this person come to Wuxia City? He was no stranger to Ning Chen's matters. It could be said that the three matches between the Grand Xia and the true extreme nation had been this little eunuch's personal performance. However, later on, he had been thrown off a cliff by the Eternal Night Church's godchild on the way to the bride's wedding. His whereabouts had been unknown ever since. Wuxia City was a bit far from the imperial city. His spies couldn't have the same information as the palace spirits in the imperial city. Thus, Prince Tai didn't know that Ning Chen had entered the academy. However, Prince Tai didn't care about this. He didn't want to care about the imperial city's matters. "Third brother, how was it? Did you find a sword attendant that satisfied you?" "Him." Prince Yen calmly pointed at Ning Chen. "Oh." Prince Tai narrowed his eyes. His body moved, and he drew his sword from the sword rack and slashed at the youth. Ning Chen's pupils shrank. He didn't dodge or retreat. His sword came out of its sheath, and he didn't hesitate to use a move that would injure both of them. Bang! Prince Tai turned his sword around and placed it in front of him. Pang! The two men's clothes began to flutter from the shockwave. Not bad. Prince Tai put away his sword and praised. Not only was he ruthless to his enemy, but he was even more ruthless to himself. There was a difference in strength between the two. If it had been a real battle, choosing to injure both of them would have been the only correct way. In a battle between the strong and the weak had a slim chance of winning. Once they had misgivings, they would lose even faster. Ning Chen was a bit unhappy, extremely unhappy. He wasn't a thing and didn't like to be casually tested by others. He hated this kind of high and mighty attitude. Perhaps Prince Tai didn't feel it himself, but that was what he showed. "Prince Tai, Prince Yen, thank you for your praise. However, I'm not interested in a sword attendant. Moreover, I still have things to do. Goodbye." After saying that, Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and was about to leave. He came here for the sake of Zhangsun. Otherwise, no one would be able to force him. Although he cherished his life, it wasn't to the extent that he could give up everything for it. As a descendant of China, his life could be lost, but his dignity was priceless. Chapter 55. Ning Chen's pride was hidden deep in his bones, and deeply engraved in his bones. His usual shyness, agreeableness, and even his thick skin were just an optimistic attitude towards this damned fate. If he was really pushed to the brink, he would rather be reborn. Dying once would not make a difference if he had to do it again. Wait. At this moment, Yen Imperial Prince spoke. His calm expression had turned gloomy ever since he unsheathed his sword. Ning Chen stopped. The stubbornness and arrogance in his eyes were no longer concealed. Yen Imperial Prince turned around and looked at Qin Imperial Prince beside him. "Second brother, I brought Ning Chen here, so he's my guest. Your probing just now made me unhappy." Yen Imperial Prince took 2 steps forward and looked at the youth in front of him. "Ning Chen, Qin Imperial Prince is my elder brother, so I can't ask him to apologize. However, as I said just now, I brought you here, so you're my guest. If I offended you in any way, I'll apologize to you." Ning Chen narrowed his eyes, hiding his emotions. Yen Imperial Prince's extraordinariness surprised him once again. Other than his talent and martial arts, his bearing was also unparalleled in the world. No wonder everyone in the world saw Yan Imperial Prince as the legend of Wuxia. This living legend indeed had a perfection that left others in the dust. Once, he had told Li Er that any perfection was a lie waiting to be exposed. Today, he took back those words. He couldn't see any flaws in Yan Imperial Prince. There might be inadequacies or regrets, but he definitely wasn't a flaw. Ning Chen also apologizes for my rudeness just now. Ning Chen lowered his head and bowed. Then what about the sword attendant? Yan Imperial Prince's expression softened slightly. In his eyes, Ning Chen was indeed the most suitable candidate. Other than him, he also trusted Zhang Xuan's judgment. Hearing Yan Imperial Prince mention the sword attendant again, Ning Chen sighed softly and said honestly, I do have something to do. I hope Imperial Prince can find someone better. What is it? Yan Imperial Prince asked stubbornly. Ning Chen was startled. He didn't understand why Yan Imperial Prince had to choose him. After thinking about it, he said honestly, I'm going to Sword City to see someone. Hearing the two words Sword City, Yan Imperial Prince frowned. Must you go? Must go. Ning Chen nodded and replied. He had traveled thousands of miles to come here, so he definitely wouldn't give up before seeing Mu Qingxue. Prince Yan pondered for a moment and said slowly, I will go with you on the condition that you become my sword attendant. He knew how dangerous Sword City was. If Ning Chen went there alone, he might not be able to come out alive. Ning Chen was tempted and asked, how long? 10 years, said Prince Yan. Impossible. Ning Chen rejected without hesitation. 10 years was too long. Even if the other party was Prince Yan, he could not give up 10 years of freedom. Speak. Prince Yan frowned again and gave him the most leniency. 1 year, Ning Chen said firmly. Prince Yan thought that a year was too short, but he really needed a sword attendant. Sure. In the end, Prince Yan nodded and officially reached an agreement with Ning Chen. From this day onwards, Ning Chen became the person who carried the sword for Yan Qin Prince. The term was 1 year, and there was no turning back. Prince Yan had 4 swords in a sword rack. Ning Chen had a wheelchair, so he carried it on his wheelchair. Of the 4 swords, 2 were green and red, 1 was blue, and the last one was deeply embedded. He could not pull it out. These 4 were not ordinary swords. Green and red, 1 was cold and 1 was hot. Blue was soft and rippling. Ning Chen could not feel any aura from the last one, but he feared it the most. Prince Yan, Ning Chen said. He felt awkward when he spoke. Prince Yan frowned. Ning Chen was going to follow him for a long time, so he could not keep calling him Prince Yan. In the past, he had always been alone. Now that there was one more person, he had to think of a new way to address him. Just call me Senior. After thinking for a moment, Prince Yan relaxed his frown and said casually. Speaking of which, Ning Chen had been with Zhang Sun for a while, so he deserved to be called Senior. Ning Chen called him that secretly, feeling much better than calling him Prince Yan. Senior, when can we leave for Sword City? Tonight, but before that, come with me to get a sword. King Yan said as he strode forward. Ning Chen was stunned, then turned his wheelchair and followed. The Silver Garden was a beautiful place to welcome guests in Wuxia City's City Lord's mansion. It was located above a heavenly spring, and it was as warm as spring all year round. Pear blossoms drifted down like snow. Wuxia City was different from other places in the Central Plains. It had existed for far too long and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties in the Central Plains. Its origins were shockingly ancient. It was said that Wuxia City was behind the rise of the Grand Xia. After the founding of the Grand Xia, the Grand Xia Emperor allowed the city lord's bloodline to be hereditary. 1,000 years had passed, and many things had changed. The only thing that did not change was the strength of Wuxia City. Under the heavens, no one would look down on this ancient place that had not declined. The city lord's bloodline was a transcendent existence in Wuxia City. The Grand Xia had sent a martial Marquis here not only to intimidate Sword City in the east, but also for other reasons. Today, in this beautiful silver court, they welcomed a distinguished guest. This person was naturally not Ning Chen, but the number one person of the Grand Xia's younger generation, Yin Maxiao. It was rumored that Yin Maxiao had been taken in as a personal disciple by one of the three dukes, Duke Shiyu. It was only a matter of time before he would be granted the title of Marquis. Amidst the snow in the Silver Garden, Peerless City Master sat quietly on the main seat. He was dressed in a purple court robe with a golden spider belt of the same color around his waist. His black hair was tied up and fixed with a jade-green gilt crown. His slender body was straight and his words were calm without losing his bearing. On one side, the wife of the city lord was wearing a noble robe and was toasting with a smile. On the other side, Qin Wushuang's beautiful eyes moved and glanced at Yin Maxiao from the corner of his eyes. Anyone could see the affection in his eyes. All the heroes sat down and drank to their heart's content. The titans of the 10 places had brought the most outstanding people of the younger generation and represented the top strength of each place. However, at this moment, an uninvited guest slowly walked over. Behind him, he brought his newly recruited sword servant. Ning Chen felt helpless. He was not here to cause trouble, he was only here to carry a sword. Prince Yan. The Wuxia city lord stood up with an ugly expression. This Prince Yan had come to steal his sword. I am here to take the sword. Prince Yan opened his mouth and said these words without any threat. However, it had changed the expression of all the major figures at the scene. Everyone knew that the Wuxia city lord had a family treasure sword called Zhiga. It was in this silver garden. The Zhiga sword was bestowed by the second-generation Xia emperor 1,000 years ago. It was a rare heavy sword and also the emperor's sword. In the past, the Wuxia city's internal strife had continued for many years and the people had suffered greatly. The second-generation Xia emperor had bestowed the emperor's sword and allowed the Wuxia city lord to borrow 100,000 soldiers from nearby to quell the chaos. However, as soon as the internal strife was quelled and before the emperor's sword could be retrieved, the second-generation Xia emperor had passed away due to illness. Immediately, the Wuxia city lord took this opportunity to bury the Zhiga sword in the Silver Garden. From then on, they lied to the outside world that the emperor's sword had been lost in the chaos. This was a secret that everyone knew. However, no one had exposed it. 10 days ago, Prince Yan had sent someone to deliver a letter to the city lord's residence. The content was very simple. Either the Qin family would send the sword or he would come to take it himself. Everyone knew that Prince Yan treasured swords and was good at them. Because of this, the Xia emperor had ordered that Prince Yan could choose any sword that belonged to the imperial court or the royal family. Prince Yan, you have come to the wrong place. I don't have the sword you want. Facing the major figures and the disciples of the three chancellors, the Wuxia city lord naturally wouldn't admit that the Zhiga sword was in Wuxia city. Prince Yan ignored him and walked forward step by step. He released his qi to sense the sword. It is indeed below. After 10 steps, Prince Yan stopped and muttered to himself. Prince Yan, you are going too far. Men, take them away. Facing Prince Yan's disregard, the Wuxia city lord's expression became very ugly. He slapped the table in front of him and shouted. Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, 12 guards dressed in iron armor appeared. Without saying a word, they surrounded the two of them. Ning Chen frowned. He could see that these guards weren't ordinary people. Their qi was long and the weakest one was at the peak of the 4th stage of the Hotian realm. To him, dealing with one of them wasn't a problem. He could barely protect himself against 2 of them and 3 of them would definitely be defeated. As for the strongest ones, their qi was much higher than his, so he couldn't tell. Prince Yen looked indifferent. He took a step forward and his powerful chi spread out, knocking away the 12 iron cloak guards who had surrounded him. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. He knew that Prince Yen was very strong, but he didn't expect him to be this strong. These years, Prince Yen had hidden too much of his talent. Gradually, people forgot that this legendary martial artist of the Xia dynasty was as rare as his talent. Elder Fengyu. The Wuxia city lord's heart sank. Whoosh, whoosh. Two dazzling sword lights, two terrifying presences, pierced mercilessly towards Prince Yen. It's them. Some of the magnates recognized their chi. These were two powerful martial artists who had been famous for almost 100 years. They had been stuck at the peak of the 9th stage for a long time and their chi was unfathomable. No one expected them to be recruited by the Qin clan. Facing the two powerful elders of Wuxia city, Prince Yen waved his hand. The green and red swords flew out from the sword rack. He held them with both hands and faced Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu. Boom! The four swords clashed, causing the sky to be filled with flying flowers. The cold rain condensed into frost, and the wind element was fire. The four elements clashed, causing water, fire, wind, and frost to surge. Finally, it turned into a storm, causing everyone to retreat. Not bad. Prince Yen said lightly. He turned his swords and pushed Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu away. With two bangs, Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu steadied themselves. Their faces were solemn. They knew that they had met a strong enemy this time. The two of them, one on the left and one on the right, rushed forward again. Their sword moves were coordinated, and their attack and defense were in sync. They were fighting against the legends of the Xia dynasty. Prince Yan's expression was calm. His body was like a willow, and his two swords moved gracefully. For a moment, the two of them had no way to attack. The people in the battle were shocked, and the people outside the battle were even more shocked. Who would have thought that the prince of the Xia dynasty was so powerful? Elder Fengyu and Elder Fengyu couldn't win after a long battle. They pushed their cultivation to the limit. Suddenly, the space shook, and their moves became even more vicious. Prince Yen was not shocked or afraid. His expression was still calm. He waved his green sword, and frost condensed. The moment the two swords clashed, it trapped Elder Fengyu's sword. In the next moment, Prince Yan's red sword pushed Elder Fengyu away. He then followed up with a slash. Blood spurted out. Elder Fengyu's arm was cut off from the shoulder, and blood spurted out. However, Prince Yen didn't stop there. He moved his feet and appeared in front of Elder Fengyu. He held his green sword with his left hand and pointed it at Elder Fengyu's energy center. Bang! With a groan, Elder Fengyu flew backward. The chi in his body was in a mess, and half of his cultivation was gone. I have given you a chance. I hope you will cherish it. Prince Yen warned coldly. Immediately, the green and red swords in his hands disappeared. They turned into two rays of light and flew back into the sword rack. Chapter 56. The green and red swords returned to their scabbards. Everyone was silent. Prince Yan's power shocked everyone. Two peak rank 9 cultivators had been defeated without any resistance. Ning Chen was also shocked speechless. He had seen many battles between rank 9 cultivators, but this was the first time he had seen such an overwhelming difference in power. In the guest seat, Ma Xiao's eyes flashed with battle intent. After a while, he suppressed it. It was not yet time for him to challenge the current legend of the Xia dynasty. Prince Yan's power made the Wuxia city master's face turn pale. He had never thought that Feng and Yu would be defeated so thoroughly. Only 20 years had passed, but the legend of the Xia dynasty had surpassed everyone in his generation. He had walked very, very far on the path of martial arts. Boom! While everyone was still in shock, Prince Yen walked to the center of the silver garden. He exerted force with his feet. Immediately, there was a loud rumbling sound. A bottomless crack appeared on the ground. How dare you! The sudden tremor woke up the powerful existence deep in Wuxia City. A terrifying aura pressed down from the sky, trying to stop Prince Yen from taking the sword. Prince Yen snorted coldly. The vital energy around him shot up into the sky. Then, with a boom, the aura in the sky dissipated and returned to nothingness. Even if you come out now, you can't stop me from taking the sword. I will take the Zhiga sword today. Prince Yen flipped his right hand and a vast suction force appeared. He slowly pulled the Zhiga sword out from the crack in the ground. The dark gold Zhiga sword appeared. Immediately, waves of heavy pressure spread out. This sword had been buried deep in the silver garden for thousands of years. It had absorbed too much qi of the earth, making the already heavy sword feel like it was weighed down by 1,000 pounds. Prince Yen pointed with his finger and sealed most of the qi of the earth. Then, he waved his hand and a dark gold light flashed. Another sword appeared in the sword rack behind Ning Chen. Crack! The wheelchair sank half an inch into the ground, crushing the bluestone floor below. You're going too far. In the depths of Wuxia City, a powerful consciousness quickly awakened. Just as it was about to break out, it was stopped by another aura. Let him go. It's just a heavy sword. It's not worth fighting over. Humph, the will from before snorted coldly. Then, it gradually retracted its aura and calmed down once more. On the main seat, the city lord of Peerless City clenched his fists so tightly that his veins popped out, but he was powerless to stop it. Even the old ancestor had spoken, what else could he say? Let's go. Prince Yen glanced at Ning Chen and turned to walk out of the silver garden. His steps were steady and no one dared to stop him. It's so hot that it's about to explode. Ning Chen sighed softly, then struggled to turn his wheelchair and follow. From then on, he became a die-hard fan of Prince Yen. However, this Zhiga sword was really heavy. Outside the city lord's mansion, Ning Chen looked at Prince Yen in front of him and asked curiously, Senior, have you already stepped into the Xiantian realm? Ha! Prince Yen smiled faintly and replied, No. This prince is also curious. How did you sneak into the palace? Suddenly, Prince Yen said casually, scaring Ning Chen so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. Prince Yen already knew about it. It was impossible for Zhang Sun to reveal this, so Prince Yen must have seen it himself. But when did he reveal this flaw? From beginning to end, he didn't have any contact with Prince Yen. How did he expose himself? Don't think too much. Your hand once touched the green sword. This prince knew then that you didn't cleanse yourself. Prince Yen walked in front and didn't stop. He continued to explain calmly, people have their own auras, swords have their own auras. The green sword has been with this prince for a long time and its aura is connected to this prince's. Anything it touches, this prince can understand. Ning Chen was shocked. There was such a thing in the world. It was too unbelievable. He had seen many 9th-level peak masters, but he had never heard of a sword aura. This Prince Yan's talent and martial arts talent were shocking. He was almost undefeatable. Ning Chen fell silent. He didn't know how to explain. His experience in the palace was too complicated. It couldn't be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. If you don't want to say it, then don't. There's no need to hesitate. Focus on our journey. Prince Yen smiled and didn't ask any more questions. He didn't care. Everyone had secrets, and he was no exception. Everyone's secrets didn't exist to satisfy other people's curiosity. He wouldn't force it. Ning Chen let out a sigh of relief. He really didn't know how to explain. After leaving Wuxia City, they weren't far from Sword City. However, the sky was getting dark. It was inconvenient for wheelchairs to travel. The two slowed down their pace. They were still walking. No matter how slow they were, they could arrive before dawn. Therefore, they weren't in a hurry. How much did you understand from the battle just now? Under the night sky, Prince Yen asked slowly as he walked slowly in front. Senior's green and red swords, one cold and the other hot. The Wind and Rain Master's swords each carried the image of wind and rain. Senior used the red sword to fight the wind. The wind helped the fire. As long as the fire didn't go out, the red sword wouldn't lose. As for the green sword, the rain is water. When it meets the cold, it condenses. Senior used the cold to control the rain. Ning Chen described what he saw word by word. In the battle just now, although Prince Yan's strength was completely suppressed, Prince Yan's battle wisdom was even more shocking. Among the four swords, Prince Yan chose the two most suitable ones instead of the two strongest ones. If they were talking about the strongest, then the sword that was the deepest in the sword rack could easily suppress the green and red swords. In addition, the blue ancient sword was also extraordinary. It wasn't inferior to the green and red swords. In front of them, Prince Yen nodded and said, "Remember, the sword is a killing weapon. It is also the king of weapons. To be a king, you must have both wisdom and courage. If you blindly show off and use your strength to suppress others, you will end up in a disadvantageous position." Ning Chen bowed and said respectfully, "Senior, thank you for your guidance." Prince Yen nodded and didn't say anything else. He continued on his way. Ning Chen followed behind and thought quietly. It was rare to see a battle between peak 9th rank martial artists. Especially at such a close distance, it was very helpful for his martial arts cultivation. Vaguely, he felt that he had touched something. However, when he sensed it carefully, the feeling disappeared. In front of them, Prince Yan's face flashed with surprise. He slowed down again. It seemed that this kid was close to breaking through. Martial arts 5th rank was a hurdle. Once you crossed it, you would see the world. If you couldn't, you would be a frog at the bottom of the well. This kid's foundation was so strong that even he envied it. It was the first time he had seen someone like this in his life. Once he broke through this hurdle, his strength would definitely increase by a lot. On the way, Ning Chen slowed down. He kept thinking. Gradually, the wheelchair stopped and didn't move forward. Prince Yen also stopped. He stood aside and didn't say anything. Boom! After about an hour, Ning Chen's aura spread out. The silver light shone brightly. The temperature within 10 feet of him dropped rapidly. The water vapor condensed and frost fell. Prince Yen guarded him quietly. His green robe was blown by the spiritual qi from all directions. In the sword rack, the green sword hummed lightly. It was very cheerful. In the next moment, the vast spiritual qi swept the frost into Ning Chen's body crazily. He broke through the hurdle and reached the peak of 5th rank. Prince Yen looked at Ning Chen, who was in the middle of the spiritual qi. Gradually, he frowned. There was another kind of aura. In Ning Chen's ocean of qi, the dark yellow cyclone spun faster. It wanted to forcibly seize some spiritual qi from heaven and earth. At this moment, Prince Yen moved. He came in front of Ning Chen in one step. He waved his hand and the Zhiga sword came out. Then, he pointed the sword lightly and the thick earth seal broke. Prince Yan's sword finger turned again. He concentrated and poured all the thick earth qi into Ning Chen's ocean of qi. With a painful groan, the two colors around Ning Chen flickered. His cultivation broke through again and reached the 6th rank. Tomes of Arcane. At the same time, Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. He was surprised. There was no mistake. It was indeed the Tomes of Arcane, and there were 2 volumes. If the Tomes of Arcane didn't appear when he broke through and they were close enough, he wouldn't have noticed. No wonder this kid had such a strong foundation. With 2 volumes of tomes of arcane, it was impossible for him to be ordinary. The excess thick earth chi was taken away. The Zhiga sword fell into silence temporarily. Prince Yen waved his hand and put the heavy sword back on the sword rack. Then he stepped aside and waited for Ning Chen to wake up. After a long time, Ning Chen finally stabilized his cultivation state. He slowly opened his eyes and bowed down respectfully. "Thank you for your help, Senior." Although he couldn't move during the breakthrough, his spiritual sense wasn't shut off. He knew what Prince Yen had done for him. This was a great favor. If there is too much thick earth chi, it will affect the sword's aura. Instead of sealing it in the sword, I'd rather give it to you, Prince Yen nodded and said calmly. For a heavy sword, the heavier it was, the better it was. The more thick earth chi, the better it was. He had sealed most of the thick earth chi for this reason. Let's go. We've already wasted a lot of time. If we don't hurry, we won't be able to reach Sword City by dawn. Prince Yen turned and walked forward. Ning Chen nodded and turned his wheelchair to follow. He didn't know that Prince Yen had already seen the 2 golden pages in his body when he injected the thick earth chi. He also didn't know that the 2 pages were tomes of arcane. He only knew that tomes of arcane existed. He didn't know anything else. In the end, he hadn't been in this world for long. There were still many things he didn't know. Under the night sky, the 2 of them hurried towards Sword City. They didn't say anything and just listened to Ningyi. Finally, the 2 of them arrived at Sword City at dawn. This was an ancient and huge deserted city. There were very few people. They couldn't see anyone even after walking for a long time. However, this was the most dangerous city because anyone who appeared in this city could be an incredible cultivator. Sword City was the holy land of all swordsmen in the world, but it was also a forbidden place for them. Killing wasn't the only rule in Sword City. The only rule was that the strong were respected. On the streets of Sword City, there were traces of swordsmen fighting everywhere. Every sword mark was at least 2 fingers deep. Blood spilled everywhere. It had already dried up, but there was still a faint fishy smell in the air. After Ning Chen stepped into Sword City, he became anxious. He wanted to see Mu Qingxue, but he didn't want to see her so soon. He was afraid that his guess would become a reality. "Are you afraid?" Prince Yen frowned and asked softly. Ning Chen smiled bitterly, but he couldn't suppress his body's reaction. He was afraid that Mu Qingxue had forgotten about him. That chi that day was cold and indifferent. It was as if she had abandoned all emotions in the world. Could it be that in order to reach Xiantian, she had really cut off her past? "If you're afraid, why are you so determined to come?" Prince Yen frowned and asked. "I want an answer." Ning Chen said gloomily. "What if the answer disappoints you?" Prince Yen asked aggressively. Ning Chen's body trembled. He had thought about this question before, but he kept avoiding it. She was the first person to talk to him, the first person to spare his life, the first person to cut him, the first person to run away with him. How could she forget him? Chapter 57. Ning Chen felt terrible, extremely terrible. He did not know how to answer. If Mu Qingxue forgot about him, what could he do? Tie her up and take her away? She was the 6th nascent master in the world. If she did not want to, who could take her away? There was no snow in Barren City all year round. It was said that the sword in the city did not like snow. Therefore, all the snow in the world could not reach Barren City. After coming to Barren City, Prince Yen had been following Ning Chen. If Ning Chen wanted to find someone, he should lead the way. The wheelchair sank half an inch into the stone floor. Ning Chen looked around Barren City. He looked at every street and every room. Prince Yen looked at Ning Chen looking like a fool. He did not say anything and did not stop him. There were hundreds and thousands of streets in Barren City and tens of thousands of rooms. If he wanted to find someone, he could do it himself. How many times could a person be foolish in his life? He could see that this person was very important to Ning Chen, more important than he could imagine. Most of his knowledge of Ning Chen came from Zhang Sun and the legends of the world. Until they met, he finally matched his impression of Ning Chen with reality. The little eunuch mentioned by Zhang Sun was mischievous and unruly, but he was loyal and trustworthy. The little hero in the legends was brave, smart, and respectable. The Ning Chen in Prince Yan's eyes was cold, arrogant, and even cruel. However, such a person, at this moment, seemed to have gone crazy. He was weak, but also manic. Prince Yan followed behind without saying a word. His eyes were calm and unwavering, as deep as a lake. Ning Chen's state was actually very dangerous. The biggest taboo in martial arts was to have an unstable state of mind. He had just broken through to the sixth realm. If he did not have a firm belief, his cultivation could regress at any time. However, Prince Yan could tell that the person Ning Chen was looking for was much more important to him than his own cultivation. Therefore, he did not stop him or say anything. If his cultivation retreated, he could just cultivate again. Compared to the things he treasured in life, it was nothing. It had to be said that Prince Yan and Ning Chen had the same understanding on this point. The barren city was really huge. Ning Chen led Prince Yan to search the city bit by bit. There was no hope in his eyes, no sighs of disappointment. They just went in and out of the same place and kept repeating. Desolate City used to be a flourishing ancient city. It was even more powerful than Wuxia City. After the war, it gradually declined. Especially in the past 200 years, there were fewer and fewer people in Desolate City. If it wasn't for the sword in the city, it would have been taken over by Great Xia. In truth, Great Xia had not increased its territory in 700 years. The main reason was that the wars in the first 300 years were too frequent, and the people and soldiers were sick of war. No one remembered the previous name of Desolate City. Now, people either called it Desolate City or Sword City. No one cared what it was originally called. One day was very short. From the time Ning Chen and Prince Yan entered the city in the early morning until now, the sky was getting dark. They had already searched countless streets and houses. When swordsmen saw the two of them, they would silently avoid them. In Sword City, there was no trust. No one wanted to cause trouble for no reason. Ning Chen purposely stopped a swordsman. He described Mu Qingshue's appearance and asked him if he had seen him before. However, this swordsman had just arrived and was not much more familiar with the situation in Desolate City than Ning Chen. In fact, everyone who came to Sword City was looking for traces of the sword in the past. They wanted to make a breakthrough. Everyone was looking for something, but they were looking for the sword while Ning Chen was looking for the person. The figures that passed by each other no longer interacted with each other. Ning Chen's irritation grew stronger as time passed. His cultivation that had just stabilized at level 6 last night was starting to show signs of loosening. Prince Yan squinted his eyes slightly but did not say anything. If he did not care, then let him be. Just as the sky was about to turn completely dark, in the distance, a black figure caught up with them. It did not take long for them to catch up. The eye-catching insignia on their black clothes showed that they were the Shadow Guards and Shadow Dragon Guards of Great Xia. There were 11 of them, 1 Shadow Dragon Guard and 10 Shadow Guards. All of them had powerful auras and extraordinary abilities. The leader of the Shadow Dragon Guards recognized Prince Yan and knelt down. He stood up and said respectfully, "Prince Yan, His Majesty has ordered us to bring Ning Chen back. Please do not interfere." Prince Yan glanced at Ning Chen, who seemed to be oblivious and was still searching silently. He said lightly, "Level 9 stays. The rest is up to you." This. The Shadow Dragon Guard looked troubled. The level 9 mentioned by Prince Yen was of course him. However, Emperor Xia's order was to capture him alive. If he did not interfere, the chances of capturing him alive would be much lower. Who would have thought that Ning Chen, who couldn't even defeat an ordinary imperial bodyguard in the past, would escape from their hands twice? The first time, it was still fine because he was thrown off a cliff by God's son and luckily survived. But the second time, the former escaped from their sight with the help of the Empress's escort. Emperor Xia was furious because of this. Go and capture him. If he resists, kill him. The Shadow Dragon guards hesitated for a moment and made a prompt decision. If they could not capture him alive, then kill him. They could not let this little eunuch escape again. Yes. The 10 shadow guards accepted the order and quickly chased after the figure in front of them. Ning Chen had just come out of a room and was about to continue searching for the next one when he saw 10 shadows surrounding him. The shadows blocked his path. Ning Chen's path forward was blocked. He could not help but become extremely irritated. He shouted, "Move!" The wheelchair moved forward towards the space between the 2 shadow guards. Ning Chen was in a bad mood and did not want to care about anything. Follow us back to the palace. The 2 shadow guards pressed their hands on Ning Chen's shoulders and said in a low voice. In his irritation, Ning Chen could not suppress the anger in his heart and finally exploded. Scram! A violent airflow spread out. Immediately, the 2 shadow guards felt their arms go numb and their bodies become unstable. They took 3 steps back. Kill! The sudden resistance left no room for negotiation between the 2 sides. The order to kill was given and the long swords were drawn. The intertwining sword shadows formed a sword net and fell towards Ning Chen. Among the 10 people present, the lowest cultivation was at level 5. The highest was at level 7. All of you deserve to die. Ning Chen, who was furious, lost his mind. He raised his left hand slightly and a dark yellow light shone brightly, enveloping the 10 people. Boom! In an instant, the unparalleled gravity caused the bodies of the 10 people to suddenly fall. Before they had time to react, they saw the ink sword being unsheathed amidst the drifting frost. Snowflakes surged, and an ink light streaked across, cutting through their throats. The moment of shock brought about the most drastic change. Before the 4 people could stabilize themselves, they fell to the ground with a bang. The 6 people were shocked and even angrier. As Emperor Xia's personal guards, they had never been trampled on like this. The remaining 6 people were mentally prepared. They formed groups of 3 and took turns attacking and defending. They did not rush forward recklessly. Ning Chen's eyes were as cold as frost. He held the ink sword in his hand. Killing people was his priority. Soon, the 7 people were all dyed red. Ning Chen controlled the chi of earth, which made the 6 shadow guards very uncomfortable. However, the advantage in numbers was still unshakable. Every time the 2 sides exchanged injuries, it was a sign that the shadow guards were one step closer to victory. After a long battle without any results, Ning Chen showed a trace of impatience. Taking advantage of the gap between the 3 people's attack and defense, he knocked away 3 shadow guards with a bang. The wheelchair took advantage of the momentum to retreat 10 feet away. Just as the other 3 shadow guards were about to rush forward, they saw the ink sword stabbed into the ground. A green ancient bow appeared in Ning Chen's hand. The next moment, the silver light shone brightly and a terrifying arrow flew out. The 6 shadow guards narrowed their eyes. At the moment of contact, the silver arrow penetrated their bodies and 2 shadow guards flew out. Their blood dyed the sky red. The momentum of attack and defense was broken. Ning Chen patted the wheelchair and 6 shadow arrows appeared. They turned into faint black lights and swept towards the strongest of the remaining 4 people. Clang! With a few soft sounds, the shadow guards blocked 5 dark arrows. However, the last dark arrow suddenly fell at the last moment and changed direction. The shadow guard trembled and stepped back half a step when the shadow arrow entered his body. At a distance of 10 feet, the chi of earth was not enough to affect the 4 people. However, it was enough to affect one shadow arrow. And his shadow arrows had always been coated with medicine. It was not poison. It was just a strong anesthetic. Beside Prince Yen, the shadow guard was shocked. In just a few breaths, 6 of the 10 shadow guards were dead and 1 was injured. When did Ning Chen grow to such a level? If this continued, the 10 shadow guards would all be buried here. The shadow guard felt a chill in his heart. He could no longer care about Prince Yen. He moved and was about to attack personally. I said that the rank 9 will stay. At the same time, a calm voice sounded. In front of the shadow guards, Prince Yen blocked their path and did not allow them to take half a step forward. Prince Yen, you are disobeying His Majesty's order. The shadow guard was furious and shouted. Is it serious? It was a simple sentence. He did not care at all. Prince Yen stood calmly between the shadow guard and Ning Chen. He was like a tall mountain that no one could cross. You. The shadow guard was about to move again when he suddenly felt his breath stagnate. At the same time, he was shocked and fearful. Ugh! There was an indignant grunt. On the other side of the battlefield, the dark shadow guard who had been injured by the dark arrow was unable to escape the fate of death. Ning Chen, who had lost his patience, was no longer as shy and harmless as before. Every move he made was aimed at killing. The last 3 shadow guards who received Ning Chen's wrath became more and more frightened and cold as the battle went on. They had to guard against the strange dark yellow light and also had to be wary of the terrifying arrow light. Their moves were more defensive than offensive, and for a time, they were defeated again and again. After 10 moves, Ning Chen's lips curved dangerously. He used the same trick again. After using all his strength to push back the 3 shadow guards, he moved back in his wheelchair and stabbed the ink sword into the ground. The broken death appeared again. The 3 were shocked and rushed forward to stop this frightening arrow. However, the expected shadow arrow did not appear. Instead, it was a merciless shadow sword. After the shadow sword, a cold voice echoed in their ears. Idiots, I lied to you. Bang, bang, bang. Under their unwilling and incredulous gazes, the 3 fell to the ground and could not get up again. Chapter 58. Cough cough. Ning Chen covered his bleeding chest and coughed violently. Then, a silver light shone on his right hand and sealed the wound. He ignored it. As for the other wounds on his body, they were not fatal. It would not be too late to heal them after finding Mu Qingxue. Ning Chen continued his search. Not far behind, the dark dragon guard's face turned ugly. He stared at the person in front of him and said sternly, Yan Qin Prince, I will report what happened today to His Majesty. I hope you can take care of yourself. Heh. Yan Qin Prince chuckled and followed Ning Chen. I'll be waiting. Hearing this, the dark dragon guard's face changed again and again. Then, he turned into a ray of light and flew back the way he came. He had to report what happened today to Emperor Xia as soon as possible. Ning Chen's growth was too terrifying. In just a few months, he had surpassed all the dark shadow guards. There was also the bow in his hand, which was a great threat. Even he felt a trace of pressure from the arrow just now. After the dark dragon guard left, Ning Chen and Yan Qin Prince did not pay attention to him. They continued to search house by house and street by street. The night was long. Under the moonlight, the figure on the wheelchair was tired and stubborn. Behind him, another figure followed without a word. Suddenly, the world changed. Above the 9 heavens, a sword light shone like the moon. With a boom, it slashed towards the distance. Bang! Another powerful aura blocked it. It was a bit weaker, but it could still fight. Mu Qingxue. Ning Chen's body shook. He looked at the sword light above the 9 heavens. Then, he moved his wheelchair and rushed forward. There was no mistake. It was definitely her aura. Yan Qin Prince frowned. He walked a few steps quickly and turned into a ray of green light to follow. In this short period of time, the 2 strong cultivators had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Their figures could not be seen clearly, but they were so powerful that it was scary. After a while, the battle stopped. The moon above the 9 heavens slowly descended. Her clothes were as white as snow. Her perfect face was cold and emotionless, without a trace of human emotions. Mu Qingxue. The black wheelchair stopped. Ning Chen looked at the beautiful girl in front of him. At first, he was happy. Then, his smile froze and disappeared. His heart also sank. The beauty that entered his eyes was just like her coldness. It was perfect yet unreal, so distant that it was untouchable. The coldness in his eyes was like a knife or a sword, cutting Ning Chen until he couldn't breathe. She had really forgotten about him. The sudden heavy blow made it difficult for Ning Chen to suppress the injuries that had accumulated in his body for a long time. He grunted and vomited blood. The next moment, the dark yellow and silver auras around Ning Chen's body flickered continuously. His state of mind changed drastically, and he could no longer maintain his unstable cultivation. He fell directly from the 6th grade martial path. Prince Yan's expression changed. He took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Yi Fujian. He condensed qi with his finger and pointed at Yi Fujian's qi si. Calm your mind. The Prince of Yan bellowed in a deep voice. He activated his cultivation technique by 30% and forcibly suppressed the raging vital qi in the former's body. Not far away, Mu Qingxue was quietly watching this scene. There was no change in his cold eyes. His realm fell and the heavenly book appeared. Ning Chen didn't care about his injuries and forced the golden paper of the life scroll out of his body. Then he vomited a mouthful of red blood, dyeing the heavenly book red. Do you still remember it? You gave it to me to strengthen my body. Ning Chen smiled brightly. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth and gradually dyed most of his clothes red. People couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Life scroll. Mu Qingxue's calm face finally changed. He didn't remember anything. Instead, he became even colder. You deserve to die. The cold voice destroyed Ning Chen's last bit of hope and perseverance. At this moment, a sword light as bright as the moon slashed down. Heaven and earth lost all colors. Boom! The moment the moon fell, the Zhiga sword was drawn and blocked this deadly sword. Prince Yan's expression was unprecedentedly serious. He said slowly, "With me here, no one can hurt him today." The life scroll that was dripping blood floated in front of Ning Chen, but it couldn't call back the lost memories. From now on, they would be separated by the horizon. Hee hee. Crazy and soulless laughter echoed in Desolation City. It was so desolate under the night sky. Clang! The swords collided. One heavy and one fast. Prince Yan held the Zhiga sword and faced Mu Qingxue, who was in the nascent realm. The battle reached a climax in an instant. A legend versus a nascent realm. It was supposed to be a battle of great disparity. However, because the swords in their hands repulsed each other, it became a stalemate. At this moment, another powerful figure came. After seeing the life scroll in front of Ning Chen, his face darkened. It turned out that the life scroll wasn't in Princess Miao Yu's hands that day. It was in the hands of the person in front of him. God's Son's aura was a bit messy. Just now, he used up a lot of energy in the battle with Mu Qingxue. After a short rest, he barely recovered 70% of his energy. Prince Yen couldn't help but frown at the appearance of the new powerhouse. His Jiga sword became even heavier. The thick earth energy spread out, trying to slow down Mu Qingshue's extreme speed. Not far away, God's son slowly walked over. His figure flashed a few times and arrived in front of Ning Chen. He pressed his palm down without hesitation. This person deserves to die. Bang! At this critical moment, another sword flew out from the sword rack. Prince Yen arrived in the blink of an eye. He gripped his left hand and held his sword in front of Ning Chen, blocking God's son's palm power. I said, today, no one can hurt him. Prince Yan's expression was calm and serious. His tone didn't allow any doubt. 2 swords against 2 geniuses. The legend of Xia stood in front of Ning Chen alone, protecting this last line of defense. He didn't allow anyone to take half a step in front of him. Mu Qingxue, God's son. Both of them were aiming for the life scroll. However, they were stopped by Prince Yen. Their eyes were unusually cold. Swish! The beautiful snow-colored figure moved. Prince Yan's Jiga sword moved at the same time. The thick earth energy and his own perception of the sword energy barely blocked Mu Qingshue's sword. At the same time, God's son moved his feet lightly. His palm moved like wind and thunder. The blue ancient sword in Prince Yan's left hand used softness to overcome hardness. Endless blue water light received the power of wind and thunder and scattered it into the ground. Facing 2 of the most powerful geniuses of the younger generation, even the legend of Xia dynasty put 10% of his offense and 9% of his defense. He was surrounded by danger. Every move was fast and heavy. His palm was strong and his sword was soft. The 2 swords faced the enemy from the left and right. There was no gap between attack and defense. However, he gradually showed signs of being unable to hold on. After a dozen or so moves, Prince Yan's halting spear slowed down by half a beat. Immediately, the Chengying sword flashed past, and a piece of green cloth silently floated down from his right sleeve. The king of Yen frowned and looked at the sword in the depths of the sword rack. A hint of hesitation flashed across his heart. It was already difficult to deal with Mu Qingxue with the sword in his hand. With God's son, he had no chance of winning. In the moment of hesitation, Prince Yan's sword power was insufficient. His left hand that was holding the sword couldn't help but feel slightly numb. Prince Yen sighed helplessly. When he finally made up his mind to pull out the sword in the deepest part of the sword rack, suddenly, an earth-shattering aura exploded behind him. 3 terrifying arrows shot out like stars and moons, shooting towards the Son of God in the middle of the battle. The sudden change broke the stalemate. Prince of Yen moved his body and understood. He combined the 2 swords. The Jiga sword knocked away Mu Qingxue, and the blue ancient sword released a vast water wave. Then, he grabbed Ning Chen and turned into a beam of flowing light, flying away. Mu Qingxue was about to chase after him, but he was trapped by the wave of water and slowed down. Boom, boom, boom. On the other side, God's son took 3 steps back after receiving 3 arrows. Although he wasn't at his peak, he was still unharmed. Prince Yen brought Ning Chen 100 miles away from the barren city before stopping in the wilderness. It wasn't that he didn't want to continue, but that Ning Chen couldn't hold on any longer. The last 3 arrows had completely exhausted all of Ning Chen's energy. Even if he was at his peak, he didn't try to draw the second arrow. Not to mention shooting 3 arrows consecutively when his injuries were worsening. Hold on. Prince Yan's heart sank when he saw the chaotic aura around Ning Chen and the blood that kept flowing out. His previous injuries were still manageable, but after his realm dropped, the scattered aura rushed in all directions, worsening his injuries by several times. What was worse was that the true essence in Ning Chen's Qi, which was used to suppress his injuries, was also used up in an instant. He couldn't stop his injuries from worsening. Ah! With a muffled groan, Ning Chen's body swayed. He immediately turned his head and vomited a mouthful of blood. His consciousness gradually faded. Ha! Prince Yen stepped forward and poured his vast aura into Ning Chen's body, forcefully suppressing all the true qi in his body. This can't go on. After a while, Prince Yen stopped. He knew he couldn't save people, so he had to think of another way. He grabbed Ning Chen with his right hand and turned into a stream of light, flying away. Not long after the two left, a beautiful figure in white appeared. She glanced at the blood on the ground and frowned. She immediately turned and left. Wushuang City. Prince Yen brought Ning Chen and flew quickly. He pushed open the gate of Prince Tai's residence and directly rushed to the front hall. In the next moment, a heavy shout resounded through the entire residence. "Second brother, quickly come out and save him." That shout roused everyone in the residence. Prince Tai quickly arrived in the hall. Seeing Prince Yan's somewhat chaotic aura, his heart sank. This was clearly the sign of a huge battle. He understood his third brother better than anyone else. Thus, he was even more aware of Ning Chen's extraordinary accomplishments on the martial path. There were only a few people in the world who could force him to this point. Prince Tai was just about to ask when Prince Yen raised a hand to stop him. "We'll talk about the rest later. Save him first." Prince Tai finally noticed Ning Chen, who was leaning against his wheelchair. He reached out to check his pulse, and his expression gradually became unsightly. What a chaotic pulse. Prince Tai's doubts grew. The chaotic true qi in Ning Chen's body was clearly a sign of his cultivation technique collapsing. But with his third brother here, how could such a thing happen? What shocked him even more was that this person wasn't a eunuch. At this time, Xia Nianyi also arrived in the hall. Looking at the unconscious Ning Chen covered in blood, she strangely didn't feel any joy in her heart. Instead, she felt a complicated and indescribable heaviness. In the hall, Prince Tai temporarily suppressed the doubts in his heart. He looked at his third brother and said sternly, "Do you know how much of a price it will cost to save him?" In this world, there was no gratuitous favor, and there was no unrequited favor. He couldn't help anyone. Prince Yen didn't answer. He only said two words in a deep voice, "Save him." Prince Tai frowned again. Looking at Xia Nianyi's stubborn appearance, he finally nodded helplessly. "Nianyi, go get the heaven reversal pill." "Yes." Xia Nianyi responded and immediately ran to the pill room. Xia Nianyi left. In the hall, Prince Yen looked at the miserable Ning Chen in the wheelchair and couldn't help but sigh. Time only left a name, not mercy. Chapter 59. Xia Nianyi quickly returned, holding a box carved from green jade in her hands. Opening the box, there was only a Longan-sized pill quietly lying inside. There were millions of pills in the world, but very few of them had the qualifications to have the word heavenly in them. But any pill with the word heavenly meant it was inextricably linked to the Xiantian realm. For example, the Xiantian pill in the Grand Xia's imperial palace, or the heaven reversal pill in Xia Nianyi's hand. The word heavenly was just like its name. To the current Ning Chen, it was one of the few pills that could save his life. As soon as the pill entered his mouth, its vast medicinal energy erupted. It was powerful and domineering, directly charging into his qi. Ugh! Ning Chen let out a pained groan as he frowned. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Imperial Prince Yen frowned and stepped forward. His right hand formed a sword, and he poured his true yuan into Ning Chen's qi. Using the domineering medicinal energy, he repeatedly combed through Ning Chen's chaotic meridians. This heaven reversal pill's medicinal energy was too domineering. If the person who took it didn't have a Xiantian or someone infinitely close to the Xiantian realm to help suppress it, they would probably die before the pill could even be used. Fortunately, Prince Yan was here. After a long while, Ning Chen's injuries gradually stabilized. Seeing this, Prince Yan pointed his sword finger and sealed most of the medicine in Ning Chen's body, leaving only a little to help him recover. After that, Imperial Prince Yan retracted his hand and let out a tired sigh. Third brother, you have to think this through. His identity might bring you a lot of trouble. Imperial Prince Tai waited for Imperial Prince Yan to finish before warning him. Someone who hadn't been cleansed had actually stayed in the Imperial Palace for so long. Once this matter was exposed, it was easy to imagine how big of a commotion it would cause. The Xia Emperor definitely wouldn't allow such a scandal to spread. He would definitely kill everyone who knew about it. Imperial Prince Yan's identity was special. Although he wouldn't be killed, it would definitely arouse the Xia Emperor's suspicion and dissatisfaction. Imperial Prince Yan's expression didn't change at all. He slowly said, "Don't worry, second brother. I know what I'm doing." Imperial Prince Tai sighed and didn't say anything else. He hoped Imperial Prince Yan really did know what he was doing. The current Xia Emperor really wasn't a benevolent ruler. 10 days later, Prince Yan left Prince Tai's mansion with Ning Chen, who had just recovered from his injuries. Ning Chen's injuries couldn't be healed in a short period of time. However, as long as he didn't use force, he wouldn't explode easily. The heaven-revolving pill was omnipotent, but it was not omnipotent. It was not easy to pull Ning Chen back from the gates of hell in one piece. As for the cultivation he had lost, he could only rely on himself to regain it. He had already sealed the remaining medicinal effects of the heaven-changing pill into the latter's body. It might come in handy one day. Their destination was the south of the Xia kingdom. This year, Ning Chen was the swordsman of Prince Yan and was responsible for carrying his sword. Prince Yan wanted to go to the south of the Great Xia. The reason was simple. In the vast empire, this was the only place he had not been to. Furthermore, it was time to settle a grudge from the past. Ning Chen did not express any opinion. Ever since he woke up, he rarely spoke. Prince Yan did not try to persuade him, nor did he care. In his eyes, any words of encouragement were useless. If he could not overcome the hurdle in his heart, no one would be able to persuade him. The road to the south was very long and long. The two walked very slowly, step by step, as if they were sightseeing. The heavens gave you a pair of eyes, not just to let you look at the ground beneath your feet, Prince Yan said calmly as he walked in front and looked at the scenery. Ning Chen raised his head and looked at Ming Chuan in front of him. Then, he fixed his gaze on Prince Yan and said unhappily, "Thank you for your advice, senior. However, Ning Chen is not in the mood to appreciate it. I am not trying to enlighten you. I am just telling you that if you keep your head down like this, you will always see the ground beneath your feet. However, your eyes can see much more than this." "I understand." Ning Chen nodded and said respectfully. For the rest of the journey, Ning Chen no longer kept his head down. Instead, he looked forward. Even if he was not in the mood to appreciate it, he silently imprinted the scenery in front of him into his eyes. Prince Yan knew that Ning Chen was not someone who was easily influenced by the outside world. However, after seeing more, he would slowly change. Half a month later, the two arrived at the south of the Xia kingdom. Unlike the north, the weather here was relatively warm. Even in the 12th month of winter, there was no bone-chilling cold. After arriving here, the pain in Ning Chen's legs lessened significantly. This was perhaps the only thing worth being happy about. There was a Prince Yu in the south. He was the 7th brother of Prince Yan and also the youngest of Emperor Xia's 4 surviving brothers. However, he was also the one who had been sent the furthest away. It was not that Prince Yu had done anything wrong. In fact, during the battle for the throne, Prince Yu was still immature. However, Prince Yu's mother had offended the current Emperor Xia too much. Prince Yu was simply implicated. After arriving here, Prince Yan was not in a hurry to see his youngest brother. They had not seen each other for nearly 20 years. Even their memories had become blurry. First, he wanted to go to the barbarian dynasty to see someone and settle a grudge. The barbarian dynasty was close to the south. It was a dynasty about the same size as the true extreme country. The current barbarian king was a powerful cultivator who was infinitely close to the Xiantian realm. When he was still the crown prince, he had hidden his identity and infiltrated the Xia kingdom. He had fought with Prince Yan, who had also not yet been crowned king. At that time, the third prince of the Xia kingdom had already shown his talent in martial arts. He was known as the crown prince of the Xia kingdom. This made Prince Yan very unhappy. The two of them fought outside the palace. This matter shocked the entire world. Only then did they know that there was someone in the younger generation who could be mentioned in the same breath as the third prince of the Xia kingdom. The northern Yan and the southern barbarians were spread throughout the world after that battle. The two of them had agreed to fight again when they reached the Xiantian realm. Now, Prince Yan could take that step at any time. Barbarian King did not hold back either. He had been at the peak of the acquired realm for many years, waiting for the opportunity to break through. Ning Chen had only heard about the previous generation's incident. However, in his opinion, Prince Yan would not lose. After the battle in Sword City, Ning Chen realized that although they were both at the peak of the acquired realm, the difference in strength between them was like heaven and earth. People as strong as Son of God and Prince Yan could even fight with Mu Qingxue, who had just reached the Xiantian realm. He still could not understand what kind of realm this was. However, he knew that the Xiantian realm was a natural moat that separated the heavens and the earth. The Xiantian realm was also known as the Heavenly Man. They could communicate with the power of heaven and earth. This was something that acquired realm masters could not compare to. However, there were very few people who could break through this uncrossable natural moat and fight Xiantian realm masters with their peak acquired realm cultivation. There had been such people in the past, today, and in the future. No matter how strong Barbarian King was, he could not be stronger than Prince Yan, who could already fight Xiantian realm masters. At least, that was what Ning Chen thought. The Barbarian King Palace was only a 2-day journey from the southern border. Prince Yan led Ning Chen from outside the Barbarian King Palace and fought their way into the Barbarian King Palace. Everywhere they passed, there were no casualties. In fact, Prince Yan was not a person who liked to kill. The former crown prince of the Barbarian King was now sitting on the throne. His youthfulness was gone, replaced by endless majesty. "You're old," Prince Yan said calmly. "You haven't changed," Barbarian King sighed. "Return to your original appearance. It's only been 20 years. It's nothing to the current legend of the Xia kingdom." "Ha," Prince Yan smiled faintly. His appearance changed instantly, and he returned to his youthful appearance from 10 years ago. "This is the third prince that I know. He's both civil and military. He's arrogant and unruly." As he spoke, Barbarian King slowly stood up. At this moment, the color of the sky changed. A heavy aura like that of a prehistoric beast quickly awakened, causing the space to distort. "Ning Chen, step back." Prince Yan's expression became serious as he said in a low voice. "Okay," Ning Chen nodded. He immediately put down the sword rack, turned his wheelchair, and walked away. "Ah man, go and greet the guests." The Barbarian King also said something to a pretty girl below the palace. "Yes," the girl nodded. In the next moment, a man walked forward and pushed Ning Chen away silently from the battlefield between the two. She knew that her father had been waiting for this battle for a long time. As the two of them walked away, the battle began. Prince Yan moved his hand. On the ground, the Zhiga sword flew from the rack and into his hand. At the same time, Barbarian King stomped his feet and immediately flew out like a cannonball. He suddenly punched towards Prince Yan. Boom! The sword and the fist collided. In the end, the fist suppressed the sword. Prince Yen retreated half a step. For the first time, a drop of blood fell from the corner of his mouth. Ning Chen was shocked. Prince Yen, who had not been injured when facing Mu Qing and the god Sun, was injured in the first move. This barbarian king's strength was too terrifying. He could definitely be called unparalleled in the world. I haven't seen you for 20 years. Your progress is not as great as mine. Barbarian King laughed wildly. He jumped up and suddenly stomped his foot. Prince Yen frowned. He moved his left hand. With a swoosh, the blue ancient sword flew out. He waved his hand and a wave of water filled the sky. Immediately, the Zhiga sword moved again and met Barbarian King's big foot head-on. Bang! Barbarian King's big foot broke through the water barrier and crashed into the Zhiga sword. A powerful shock wave spread out. The clothes of the two people fluttered. Prince Yen used his two swords to disperse Barbarian King's divine power and finally managed to block the latter's attack. It wasn't until this moment that the two of them were once again on the same starting line. Their moves started again, and the rumbling sounds were endless, showing how fierce the confrontation between the two of them was. Beside Ning Chen, a man's pretty face flashed with surprise. This was the first time she saw someone who could directly block her father's strength. Although it was a bit of a trick, he still managed to block it. Is this the legend of the Xia kingdom? A man's voice was very pleasant to hear. It was clear and melodious. She did not have the shyness of a girl from the Central Plains. Instead, she had the unique straightforwardness of the barbarians. Ning Chen nodded. Without a doubt, Prince Yen was the legend of the Xia kingdom. Perhaps Yin Ma Xiao, the eldest prince, Xia Miaoyu, and the others of the younger generation had already grown up. However, compared to Prince Yen, they still could not be mentioned in the same breath. Are you his disciple? A man continued to ask. Ning Chen shook his head and replied, No, I'm just a sword attendant. The shock on Wild's face grew even stronger. Such a powerful person was just a sword attendant. She felt a dangerous aura from Ning Chen. The barbarians had the sharpest senses. This meant that Ning Chen's strength definitely surpassed hers. In the barbarian dynasty, the strongest person was her father. Perhaps there were others who were stronger than Ning Chen, but there were not many of them. Especially among the younger generation, there were very few. Can you take me to the Central Plains to have a look? A man asked softly. Now she was even more curious about the mysterious Central Plains. What kind of divine land could nurture so many strong cultivators? Hearing this, Ning Chen unconsciously frowned. He was not used to a man's way of speaking. They had just met. In fact, they could not even be considered as acquaintances. Shouldn't this kind of request be made by people who were familiar with each other? However, this was only the beginning. In the next moment, a man's next sentence made Ning Chen completely speechless. If you agree, I can marry you. Chapter 60. Ning Chen knew that most of the girls of the barbarian dynasty were straightforward. They spoke whatever they thought without hesitation or faking it. They didn't feel anything when they heard it from others and would even look at it with admiration. However, once it happened to him, it made him feel uncomfortable. Miss Athman, just call me Athman, Athman. Ning Chen called out while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed through his eyes. She was a good girl, a very good girl. Unfortunately, they shouldn't have any interactions. Do you have someone you like? Ning Chen asked softly. Athman shook her head gently. I don't. Haha. Ning Chen laughed bitterly. Once you have someone you like, you'll understand how childish your words are today. You don't agree? Man didn't understand the meaning behind Ning Chen's words, but she understood the rejection in his words. She couldn't help but frown. Why? There's no reason. If there's really a reason, then it's that you don't like me, and I don't like you. Ning Chen was surprisingly patient as he explained. Why don't you like me? Man frowned even more. Could it be that I'm ugly? Ning Chen didn't know how to answer. If he didn't like her, then he didn't like her. There was no reason for it. However, he didn't want to hurt this pure and straightforward girl, so he thought for a moment before replying with a question. Then do you like me? Man thought for a moment before she said, I don't know, but I know that I don't hate you. Haha. Ning Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He continued patiently, Man, don't you want to understand the Central Plains? Then let me tell you something. In the Central Plains, only people who like each other can talk about marriage. Just not hating each other isn't enough. Is that so? Man nodded while seeming to be deep in thought. Then I'll work hard to like you and marry you. Then you'll take me to the Central Plains. Haha. Ning Chen laughed bitterly, but he didn't reply. If it was so easy to like someone, then he would have tried it a long time ago and wouldn't have to suffer as much as he did right now. Boom! Just as the two of them were talking, heaven and earth shook violently again. The battle in the main hall had reached its climax. Prince Yen combined his two swords and barely managed to fight to a draw with the barbarian king's divine power. Every move he made was 70% defensive and 30% offensive. The battle made heaven and earth miserable and chaotic. Many of the pillars in the main hall had already been destroyed. Some were shattered by the barbarian king's punches and kicks, and some were slashed by the Yen king's sword chi. Gravel flew everywhere and fell to the ground. The barbarian king was too powerful to the point of being inconceivable. His divine strength could shake mountains and split rocks. He was invincible and terrifying to the extreme. Using his unparalleled control of the sword, Prince Yen rotated his two swords and blocked one move with two moves. Only then was he able to block this terrifying divine power. Compared to 20 years ago, the barbarian king had indeed made great progress. Especially his divine power, it was simply heaven-defying. The thick earth energy in the Zhiga sword had little effect on the barbarian king. Under his divine power, that little increase in gravity had almost no effect. Therefore, Yen Imperial Prince's battle was extremely difficult. It was even more difficult than when he faced Mu Qingxue and God's Child alone. Yen Imperial Prince, you will definitely lose today's battle. The barbarian king was like a demon. The more he fought, the braver he became. The more he fought, the crazier he became. His punches and kicks caused the void to explode and tremble unceasingly. Crack! Suddenly, a soft sound was heard. The blue ancient sword in Yen Imperial Prince's hand couldn't withstand the huge force and a fine crack appeared. Ha! The barbarian king laughed wildly. He channeled another 30% of his divine power into his fist. Soon after, a bang was heard. The ancient sword broke and half of the sword flew out. Yen Imperial Prince frowned. His expression gradually turned cold. He blocked the attack with his Zhiga sword and took advantage of the momentum to retreat 10 meters away. The half of the sword that flew out fell to the ground. A touch of sadness flashed through Yen Imperial Prince's eyes. Although this blue ancient sword wasn't the strongest among the four swords, it had been with him the longest. It had also witnessed his lifetime of honor and disgrace. He didn't expect that it would be the first to leave today. With a wave of his hand, the broken ancient sword disappeared along with the half of the sword on the ground. With two clangs, they returned to the sword rack one after another. After the broken sword returned to its scabbard, Yen Imperial Prince's left hand grasped the void again. The green sword flew out and returned to his hand. The bone-piercing chill instantly filled the entire main hall. Again. His voice suddenly became colder. Yen Imperial Prince's body moved and instantly pressed forward. At the same time, the Zhiga sword in his hand changed from defense to offense. The barbarian king received the attack. His divine power shook the heavy sword. Suddenly, he felt that the satisfaction that was within his reach disappeared. The sword turned upon contact. It didn't connect and didn't stop. In the next moment, the green sword was about to take his life. It was as fast as a swan. It was so fast that it disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was so fast that he died in the blink of an eye. The barbarian king's expression was serious. He took a step back for the first time. His divine power was restrained and he couldn't use it. However, the barbarian king was the barbarian king after all. 20 years ago, he was on par with Yan Imperial Prince. How could he be at a disadvantage so easily? The barbarian king who retreated was startled by the green sword. He immediately grabbed the Zhiga sword that came after him. The Zhiga sword was restrained. Yan Imperial Prince retreated to the side of the sword rack in an instant. He pulled out the red sword and turned to the front of the barbarian king again. The green and red sword moved at the same time. The two swords approached him. The barbarian king squinted his eyes. He grabbed the Zhiga sword and smashed it down like an iron rod. However, the two swords changed direction again. It was difficult to reach him. After switching to the red sword, Yan Imperial Prince's speed increased by 30%. The two swords moved side by side. The speed of the sword overpowered the divine power. The barbarian king quickly lost his balance and showed signs of defeat. 20 years, I've waited for this day for 20 years. How can I lose? The barbarian king couldn't suppress his anger. The aura around him soared to the sky. The terrifying celestial phenomenon shocked the entire southern land. Even the northern border of the Xia kingdom could see it clearly. The seventh Xiantian. In an instant, countless people looked over. They were shocked by the sudden change. There was no mistake. That was indeed the aura of an Xiantian. It was powerful, shocking, and suppressed everything. It's the powerful barbarian king from the barbarian dynasty. After 20 years, I didn't expect that the southern barbarian king would be the first to reach the Xiantian realm. What about Yan Imperial Prince from the Xia kingdom? Why hasn't he broken through yet? It's not that easy to break through to the Xiantian realm. 2 Xiantian realm experts appeared in just 1 year. This is something that hasn't happened in the past 100 years. Although Yan Imperial Prince is amazing, he is indeed a big step behind the barbarian king this time. Unfortunately, from now on, the title of Northern Yan and Southern Barbarian will only exist in name. Not necessarily. Legend has it that Yan Imperial Prince from the Xia kingdom already has the strength to fight against Xiantian realm experts. The barbarian king has just broken through. It's still unknown who is stronger. Xiantian realm experts are Xiantian realm experts after all. No matter how strong the Hotian realm experts are, they can at most be on par with or have the strength to fight against them. They can never surpass them. No matter what, Yan Imperial Prince has been left far behind by the barbarian king. In just a few breaths' time, the experts in the world were all moved by the barbarian king's breakthrough to the Xiantian realm. Among the people of the same generation, the barbarian king and Yan Imperial Prince were the best. No one expected that the barbarian king would be the one to take the lead. In the palace of the barbarian dynasty, Yan Imperial Prince stood 30 feet in front of the barbarian king. He quietly watched the latter break through, but had no intention of interrupting him. Although he had the opportunity and ability to do so. There would be 3 calamities and 5 tribulations when breaking through to the Xiantian realm. The first tribulation, the heavenly demon tribulation, would come the moment one broke through. This was a test of one's state of mind. However, the barbarian king's mind was as firm as steel. This tribulation had no effect on him. It could be said that the people of the barbarian dynasty had a natural advantage when facing the heavenly demon tribulation. They were real, firm, and not fake. It had to be said that the barbarian king's strength was admirable, but at the same time, Yan Imperial Prince's integrity was also respectable. On the other side of the palace, a man looked at Yan Imperial Prince for a moment, then turned to look at Ning Chen and said, "He's a good person." "Yes." Ning Chen nodded. Although their fighting philosophy was different, this did not stop him from admiring Yan Imperial Prince's personality. The legend of the Xia kingdom was worthy of this name no matter when, where, and under any circumstances. "But my father is the strongest," a man continued. The princess of the barbarian dynasty was like an ordinary little girl who worshipped her father. In her eyes, her father was the strongest. Ning Chen did not respond. He did not know if the barbarian king was the strongest, but he knew that if the person standing opposite him was him, he would definitely shoot an arrow through the heart without hesitation. Therefore, Yan Imperial Prince could become the legend of the Chu dynasty, but he could not. After a few breaths, the barbarian king's realm finally stabilized. Looking at Yan Imperial Prince in front of him, a complicated look flashed across his eyes. There was hostility, but also admiration. They were lifelong rivals, but also people who respected each other the most. If not for their different standpoints, they would be best friends. Again. As he spoke, the barbarian king took a step forward. The palace rumbled and shook. The power of the Xiantian stage was undeniable. Yan Imperial Prince's expression hardened. He waved his green and red swords. 2 rays of light entered the ground and suppressed the shaking ground. In the next moment, the barbarian king's body flashed. He stepped over the barrier and punched. Yan Imperial Prince's eyes narrowed. He took a step back and instantly moved 10 feet away. Boom, boom, boom. In the violent shaking, a huge gully appeared between the two of them. The floor of the palace instantly cracked and flew everywhere. After the barbarian king broke through, his already terrifying divine power increased again. He was so strong that it was frightening. Just the strength of his physical body, without using any vital energy, was already so strong. It seemed that the battle between the two of them was gradually coming to an end. Yan Imperial Prince's green and red swords' overwhelming speed advantage was no longer so absolute because of the barbarian king's breakthrough. In addition to the barbarian king's skyrocketing divine power, there was not much suspense in this battle. As the saying goes, one strong person can defeat 10 skilled people. When one's strength reaches a certain level, it can suppress all moves. And the barbarian king, who had broken through to the Xiantian stage, had increased his strength to an unprecedented level. No matter how fast Yan Imperial Prince was, he was not so fast that he could not use any moves. Therefore, the battle was basically over. What a pity. I originally wanted to enjoy the pleasure of the battle a little longer. It seems that I can't. The barbarian king could feel the power still flowing out of his body. He could not help but sigh softly, slightly disappointed. The swords in Yan Imperial Prince's hands turned. The green and red swords immediately disappeared, turning into flowing light and entering the sword rack. You will enjoy it. As he spoke, Yan Imperial Prince walked to the sword rack. His right hand grasped the ancient sword hidden in the deepest part of the rack, and then he slowly pulled it out. Chapter 61. It was a black sword, even darker than Ning Chen's ink sword. It was as dark as the night, and no light could be seen. The moment the sword was unsheathed, Prince Yan's aura changed. It kept rising, surpassing the postliminary stage and the half-connate stage. However, there was still no sign of him breaking through to the connate stage. The barbarian king looked at the sword in Prince Yan's hand. After a long time, his pupils shrank as if he had thought of something. This was the sealing sword, abyss condensation. For thousands of years, countless swordsmen had been searching for this ancient sword. Unexpectedly, it had fallen into Prince Yan's hands. Abyss condensation was as strong as its name. When you stared into the abyss, you couldn't see what was inside. It was so deep that you couldn't see the bottom. So you've already reached the Khanate stage. The barbarian king was shocked as he felt the increasing pressure from Prince Yan. Without a doubt, this was the aura of the Khanate stage. Now it seemed that Prince Yan had sealed part of his power in abyss condensation a long time ago. With abyss condensation, even if he broke through to the Khanate stage, heaven and earth wouldn't be able to sense it. Everyone in the world knew that Grand Xia was a legend of the current generation, the crown prince of Grand Xia. He was extremely powerful, yet in the end, they still underestimated him. The sixth person in the world to step into the Xiantian realm wasn't Mu Qingxue of Sword City, but rather, it was the supreme genius of Grand Xia. Come. Prince Yan took a step forward. His expression was as calm as water as he said slowly. Unfortunately, he didn't plan to use this sword. Prince Yan gathered all his power and his aura surged. The pressure caused the space to wail. This was because he had just recovered his power. After familiarizing himself with it, he could control it freely. At the next moment, the abyss sword moved and the sky darkened. In an instant, time and space seemed to have been swallowed up. Prince Yan appeared before the barbarian king and slashed out the first and last sword attack with ease. Boom! The barbarian king blocked and punched back. However, at the moment of contact, he felt his aura leak. His divine power seemed to have fallen into the abyss and he was sent flying. The stone pillars in the main hall couldn't withstand the huge force. Several of them collapsed and fell to the ground. Prince Yan held his sword and stood in place. He didn't follow up with another attack. The battle had already ended. The barbarian king had just broken through and his cultivation wasn't stable yet. He couldn't resist the abyss condensation. I lost. Amidst the mess, the barbarian king struggled to get up. The corners of his lips were dyed red, and his expression was somewhat dejected. He didn't expect that he would be defeated so quickly. He had lost. He had lost his first battle after stepping into the Xiantian realm. Prince Yan didn't say anything, nor did he console him. He turned around and walked to the sword rack. Then, he slowly inserted the abyss in his hand. At the same time, Prince Yan quickly withdrew his aura and returned to the peak of the acquired realm. The barbarian king was not an ordinary person. He was someone who could let go of things easily. After a short period of dejection, he recovered his original free and easy spirit and asked the two of them to stay for a few days. Prince Yan did not object. He had just gone through a great battle and needed time to adjust. He was not in a hurry to leave. Ning Chen was extremely shocked. After witnessing the battle between the two absolute geniuses from the peak of the Hotian realm to the Xiantian realm, he finally realized how weak he was. Indeed, a person's eyes needed to look ahead, because the world ahead was too big. Over the next few days, the two of them settled down. Every day, Wild would go to their residence and earnestly fulfill her promise. She had said that she would do her best to like Ning Chen, so she had to keep her word. At first, Ning Chen didn't feel anything. Later, he felt a little unnatural and began to urge Prince Yan to leave. What are you afraid of? Prince Yan left this sentence and immediately walked out of the courtyard to attend the barbarian king's banquet. Ning Chen was afraid. He was afraid that this stubborn girl would really do what she said. He was even more afraid that his heart would soften. He didn't want to hurt her. She was a good girl. Therefore, he could only urge Prince Yan to leave before Wild did what she said. Prince Yan didn't seem to see this and ignored it. This made Ning Chen more and more worried. Finally, one day, what he was worried about happened. The day before the two of them were about to leave, Wild went to the palace and told the barbarian king that she was going to marry Ning Chen. The barbarian king looked at his daughter. He didn't persuade her or stop her. He only asked, "Do you like him?" "Yes." Wild nodded and said affirmatively. The barbarian king didn't ask anything else. He directly sent someone to invite Prince Yen to explain his position and opinion. Prince Yen frowned and said, "I can't make the decision." Ning Chen was only his sword attendant, not his servant. Other than carrying a sword on his back, he couldn't make any decisions for him. "Then I'll ask the person who can make the decision to say something," the barbarian king said simply and roughly. Prince Yen thought for a moment, then nodded and agreed to this matter. This day, a letter flew out of the palace of the barbarian dynasty and headed straight for the imperial city of Great Xia. Although he couldn't make the decision, there was one person who could. That was Zhang Sun in the Weiyang Palace. He knew that the relationship between Ning Chen and Zhang Sun wasn't as simple as master and servant. Zhang Sun would never mention an ordinary eunuch to him. Because they had to wait for the reply, their journey was delayed again. Ning Chen only knew that Wild went to the palace, but he didn't know what the barbarian king and Prince Yen talked about. He only felt more and more uneasy. Wild hadn't appeared for several days. This was very unusual. He didn't know that in the barbarian dynasty, girls who were about to get married couldn't go out. Half a month later, the reply from the imperial palace of Great Xia finally arrived. There were 2 letters in total. One was for the barbarian king and Prince Yen. The content was very simple. Zhang Sun agreed to the marriage on behalf of Ning Chen. As for the other letter, it was naturally for Ning Chen. Ning Chen didn't know about the other letter, but after seeing the letter in his hand, he finally knew where the strong uneasiness in his heart came from. In this world, if there was one person's orders he didn't dare to disobey, it was Zhang Sun. Zhang Sun was angry in the letter. It was very direct and very strict, forbidding him from resisting the marriage. If Zhang Sun had used her identity as the empress to pressure him, Ning Chen might have had the intention to fight back. However, Zhang Sun's entire letter was scolding him as an elder. He didn't even have the courage to fight back. It was because Zhang Sun didn't use her status to pressure him that brought him unparalleled pressure. In Ning Chen's heart, Zhang Sun had a very special place. After he came to this world, it was Zhang Sun who brought him back to Weiyang Palace and protected him from the wind and rain outside many times. Otherwise, he would have died long ago. He owed Zhang Sun a debt of support and protection. This debt of gratitude was as heavy as a mountain. So once Zhang Sun was angry, he didn't dare to talk back. He didn't dare to oppose, but he also couldn't really agree to this marriage. This made Ning Chen feel very irritated, unusually irritated. Zhang Sun's interference was the thing he least expected. He had even guessed that Prince Yen might interfere, but he didn't take it to heart. He was a sword attendant. He was only responsible for carrying the sword. He had no obligation to accept other arrangements. "Did you tell the Empress this?" Ning Chen barged into Prince Yan's room. This was the first time he was angry. There were only the 2 of them here. If he didn't tell Zhang Sun, then it naturally had to be Prince Yen. Yes. Prince Yen nodded. He had no intention of denying it. "I want to challenge you." Ning Chen's chest felt heavy. He was so angry that he lost his mind. He pulled out his ink sword with a clang and said recklessly. "All right." Prince Yen agreed. He stood up and walked outside. Ning Chen didn't think he could win. He just wanted to give Prince Yen a beating. As for whether or not he could beat him, that was another matter. Reality was just like that. There was no suspense in the battle. Ning Chen lost, and lost miserably. Even his face was disfigured. He was slapped into the ground by Prince Yen. Ning Chen was dejected. He crawled up and sat on the ground. His heart was in a mess. He didn't know what to do. "You hate that girl?" Prince Yen frowned and asked. Ning Chen smiled bitterly as he shook his head. He had never hated a man, and it was the same even today when he was forced into a corner. But Man had a stubborn personality. Once she set her mind on something, she would definitely do it. She was simple and direct, but also very troublesome. Then try to accept her, said Prince Yen indifferently. You make it sound so easy. Why don't you accept her? Ning Chen's anger rose again. Was it so easy to accept someone? At most, he and Man could only be friends. They couldn't go any further, let alone talk about marriage. Up to you. If you want to refuse, you can talk to Wuxia yourself. Prince Yen threw down this sentence, then turned and returned to his room. Ning Chen was so angry that he couldn't speak. If Zhang Sun was so easy to talk to, he wouldn't be in such a difficult position. They had known each other for so long, but when had he ever persuaded Zhang Sun? Even leaving the palace was his own decision. He had knelt for 3 days, and Zhang Sun had almost smashed him to death with a teacup. In reality, Zhang Sun was the most difficult person to talk to in this world. Once he decided on something, he would never change his mind. Ning Chen was a bit resentful that Zhang Sun had randomly set up a matchmaker. This was forcing him to run away again. But when he thought of the person in the room, he immediately gave up on the idea of running away. With that person there, it was impossible to run away. Moreover, he had a criminal record. Zhang Sun had definitely warned Prince Yen to be on guard against him running away again. If you agree, then go marry her. Why force me? Ning Chen was so angry that he couldn't do this. He couldn't do that. The one who tied the bell should untie it. Ning Chen had no other choice. He could only sit in his wheelchair and go to the princess's courtyard where Ah Man lived. Ah Man was the princess of the barbarian dynasty. Her status was noble. How could she marry someone like him who couldn't even stand up? What was going on in this girl's head? Ning Chen's distress was partly due to the pressure from Zhang Sun, and partly because he didn't want to hurt Ah Man. In reality, directly rejecting this inexplicable marriage was the most straightforward choice. But this was too cruel to Ah Man who had just turned 17. Especially since Ah Man was a princess. This was equivalent to slapping Ah Man's face in front of everyone. This was something he couldn't accept. He could ignore people he didn't care about. He could even ruthlessly stomp on people he hated. But Ah Man wasn't one of those two types of people. He couldn't be so heartless. Thinking about this, Ning Chen arrived in front of Ah Man's courtyard. Just as he was about to enter, he was stopped by a pretty maid wearing the palace robes of the barbarian race. Young master, you can't go in. You'll break the rules. What rules? Ning Chen frowned slightly. He hadn't heard of these rules when he came a few days ago. Could it be that in just a few days, the barbarian king palace had added new rules? The maid knew that the person in front of her was from the Central Plains and might not know the rules of the barbarian dynasty. She patiently explained, young master, you don't know. In the barbarian dynasty, whether it's a commoner or a princess, they can't go out before they're married. Naturally, they can't meet people casually. Ning Chen was shocked and his heart was in a mess. Could it be that Zhang Sun had already agreed on his behalf? Why didn't anyone mention it to him? Chapter 62. Ning Chen was both shocked and infuriated. But at the same time, he felt even more helpless. If it was anyone else, he would have thrown them off without hesitation. Only Zhang Sun was an exception. It was just like an elder deciding a marriage for a junior without permission. Other than being angry and helpless, what else could the junior do? If an elder was wrong, then it was an elder's fault. If she thought it was right, then it was right. In Chang Xuan's eyes, deciding on his marriage was only natural. He didn't think it was inappropriate. In fact, it was inevitable. Chang Sun was his only elder in this world. In the future, when he married, he would definitely have to get her approval. However, no matter what, he still hoped that when Changsun decided on his marriage for him, she would inform him in advance. She didn't want to decide everything just because she was an elder, right? Changsun's domineering attitude had already become a habit. Beneath her gentle and virtuous appearance was a domineering heart. He had long since seen through that, so he had always been a bit afraid of her. However, it was precisely because of that domineeringness that Changsun would ignore even the Xia Emperor's attitude and protect him time and time again. Changsun was already unrivaled. Whatever she thought was right, no one could compare to her in this aspect. He didn't dare resist, nor could he change Changsun's mind. He could only try to change Wild's mind. Furthermore, he had to resolve this matter as quickly as possible. Right now, the only people who knew about this matter were only a few people in the barbarian king palace. There was still time to back out. Once this matter spread, it would become extremely troublesome. Although the barbarian dynasty wasn't large and couldn't compare to the Grand Xiao, it was still an independent dynasty. As a princess, Wild's dignity was above all else. Marriage was a matter between two people. Breaking off the marriage was something that only one person could do. Someone had to be slapped in the face. He was thick-skinned and didn't care. Outside the monastery, a maid blocked the way. Ning Chen couldn't enter, but he had to. "I have an important matter to discuss with your princess. Please move aside." Ning Chen turned his wheelchair, wanting to force his way into the palace. "Master, you really can't go in." The maid was a bit anxious. She blocked Ning Chen, refusing to let him in. "Hongzhu, let him in." Just at this moment, a pleasant voice rang out from within the monastery. It was clear and melodious without the slightest impurity. "Yes, princess." Hongzhu bowed and respectfully said. Then, she turned around and no longer blocked her path. Ning Chen turned his wheelchair and entered. He pushed open the door to the room in the middle and saw a pretty girl sitting at the table. On the table, a red wedding dress was lying there quietly. The girl was carefully embroidering each peony flower on the dress. "I heard that before a woman from the Central Plains gets married, she has to embroider her own wedding dress so that she can live a happy life." Ah Man did not raise her head to look at Ning Chen. She was still focused on the embroidery in her hands. She had just started learning and was not very familiar with it. The peony flower was beautiful, blooming as brilliantly as blood. The heart of the flower still hadn't completely dried up. The girl's fingers were slightly red, but she was still embroidering without a trace of distraction. Ning Chen's heart ached. He couldn't bear to see her like this, but it was also cruel. In the end, he made his decision and said, "Princess, we're not suited for each other." A man raised her head, and a wisp of surprise appeared on her pretty face as she asked, "You're unwilling to marry me?" "Yes." Ning Chen nodded with a heavy heart. He really couldn't lie to this kind girl anymore. Ah Man put down the red wedding dress in her hands and stood up. Then she said, "I'll go tell my father to cancel the engagement." She spoke without any hesitation and without any anger or dissatisfaction. It was just a simple notification. Ah Man's straightforwardness surprised Ning Chen, but after the surprise, he felt even more heartache. He knew that he had hurt this sincere girl. He was never willing to owe anyone anything in his life, but he owed Ah Man a favor that could never be repaid. Ah Man stood up and walked out of the room. When she passed by Ning Chen, she stopped and said softly, "You asked me before if I liked you. At that time, I didn't know, but now I know. I like you." She couldn't make things difficult for him. If he wasn't willing, then she wouldn't marry him. Sigh. Ning Chen's heart ached. He was in so much pain that he couldn't speak. Why did fate always play with people like this? The red wedding dress on the table was lifted slightly by a breeze, and a faint fishy smell wafted over. Barbarian girls were never good at needlework, and barbarian princesses were the same. How could every woman from the Central Plains embroider her own wedding dress? The peony bloomed in the breeze. It was as beautiful as blood. You could see that every needle of embroidery was painful for you. You could see that the peony bloomed for a lifetime and someone was waiting for you. She would eventually find the person who was willing to be painful for her and wait for her. They were not fated to be together in this life. They only hoped that they wouldn't meet in the next life. Ning Chen left and closed the door. The floating wedding dress also slowly fell down. On this day, a man went to see the king of barbarians and asked to cancel the engagement. The king of barbarians was shocked and then furious. The monarch's order was like a mountain. How could it be changed so easily? However, a man stubbornly insisted. No one could change her mind, not even the king of barbarians. The king of barbarians was helpless. Looking at his favorite daughter, he had to compromise in the end. It was impossible to cancel the engagement. Although this matter was not announced to the world, there were still a few people who knew about it. He couldn't slap his own face. He just agreed to postpone the wedding date. Even though this delay was an indefinite amount of time. The king of barbarians didn't know what bewitching potion Ning Chen had given his daughter to make a man compromise again and again. He was angry and unhappy. He still didn't like people from the Central Plains. A man was a pearl in the palace of the barbarian dynasty. She was deeply respected. Therefore, several maids in the palace who knew the inside story suddenly became unfriendly to Ning Chen and Prince Yen. Prince Yen just glanced at Ning Chen calmly and didn't say anything about the wedding date being postponed. Since it was a foregone conclusion, there was no need for them to stay. After simply writing a letter to inform Zhang Sun of the matter, they were ready to leave. The king of barbarians naturally didn't intend to keep them this time. Because of Ning Chen, he didn't treat Prince Yen well either. Before leaving, a man stopped Ning Chen in front of the door of the small courtyard. She asked seriously, "Are you willing to take me to the Central Plains?" Ning Chen was slightly stunned. Before he could answer, he heard a man speak again. She said with a trace of deeply concealed sadness, "As a friend." "Okay." Beside him, Prince Yen interjected indifferently and answered for Ning Chen. Then he walked away, leaving the two of them temporarily. Ning Chen sighed softly and nodded. He had no right to refuse. A smile appeared on a man's face. It was clean and simple. That was all. The next moment, a man took out the wedding dress from the bag behind her and said softly, "The wedding dress is ready. Can I wear it once for you to see?" This was her last wish before she left. From now on, they would be friends. Ning Chen was silent. He didn't refuse and silently turned to the side, leaving the room behind him to a man. A man entered the room and walked out soon. At this moment, the entire world seemed to have lost its color. There was only a touch of beautiful red. The wedding dress was as red as blood. The girl was as beautiful as a flower. It was a perfect match. The peony flower was beautiful, but it couldn't compare to the girl's beautiful smile. Soon, Ning Chen turned and left. A man also took off the wedding dress and followed with a smile. The wedding dress was left in the room of the small courtyard. A drop of tear quietly fell from the wedding dress and disappeared in the blink of an eye. In the northern plains, warhorses neighed. The snow that had fallen intermittently for over 3 months had finally begun to melt. Winter had passed and spring had arrived. This meant that the war was about to begin. In the commander's tent, Fan Lingyue sat in front of a table and quietly read one report after another. He was still wearing the same light blue robe with various patterns embroidered on it. It was simple yet noble. The young general was called into the commander's tent and respectfully waited for the military advisor's orders. When will the third prince of the Grand Xia return to the imperial palace? Fan Lingyue looked at the report in his hand and asked without raising his head. Reporting to the military advisor, it should still take 2 more days, the young general replied. Fan Lingyue frowned but didn't say anything. Although it was a little slow, it was still within expectations. The emperor of the Grand Xia was old and wouldn't live for too long. He needed to find someone to help him. The death of the 8th prince was the best reason for the other princes to return. Even the 3rd prince, who had been sent the furthest away by the Grand Xia emperor, would definitely seize the opportunity to rush back from the battlefield at the southeast border of the Grand Xia. Right now, the 1st prince and the 10th prince had already returned to the palace. They were only waiting for the 3rd prince, and the 4 princes would all be gathered. Send someone to assassinate him. However, only failure is allowed, not success, Fan Lingyue ordered. Yes. Although the young general didn't understand, he still respectfully accepted the order. The military advisor wouldn't be wrong. He only needed to follow the orders. After the young general left, Fan Lingyue finally couldn't help coughing violently. Traces of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth and dyed the letter in front of her red. Her body was getting worse and worse. She had to make the best use of her time. Assassinating the 3rd prince of the Grand Xia was the fastest way to ignite the conflict between the 3 princes. Putting aside the 1st prince for now, the conflict between the 3rd prince and the 10th prince had already become irreconcilable because of the 8th prince's death. No matter whether the 10th prince had the intention to assassinate the 3rd prince or not, this assassination attempt would be attributed to him. As long as the Grand Xia was no longer a monolithic entity, she would have many ways to slowly widen this rift until this invincible dynasty completely collapsed. Thinking of this, Fan Lingyue couldn't help but sigh softly. How good would it be if the heavens could give her another 10 years? She thought of Ning Chen. That youth was very similar to her. He looked kind but was actually extremely cold. He had deceived everyone in the world, including her. Unfortunately, although she had tried to kill him several times, she had failed in the end. After that incident in the Grand Xia Imperial City, it could be seen that the Empress of the Grand Xia protected him to the extreme. She actually personally escorted him out of the Imperial City, and even the Xia Emperor couldn't do anything about it. In the Grand Xia, that Empress's influence was unparalleled. She didn't even lose to the Xia Emperor. The bloodline of the eldest grandson even produced 2 marquises. Her background and strength were definitely not something that other nobles could compare to. For the Empress of the Grand Xia to insist on protecting someone, it was indeed a very troublesome matter. And now that Ning Chen had Prince Yan by his side, it would be even more difficult to make a move on him. The reason why she was so eager to kill him wasn't because there was a grudge between them. She just didn't like the existence of any variables. Moreover, this variable had a weapon that everyone was afraid of. She couldn't be sure that the thing that had turned the Zhengqi palace upside down back then could be mass-produced. But, it was better to be safe than sorry. In her plan, she definitely couldn't allow anything to go beyond her control. Therefore, this Ning Chen definitely couldn't be left alive. She had to think of some way to pull him away from Prince Yan's side. Chapter 63. In Sword City, the cold moon was high up in the sky. Suddenly, a sword aura soared into the sky. In an instant, it cut open the entire world. At that moment, all the swordsmen in Sword City sensed it. Their faces were filled with shock. They knew that the Sword of Sword City was about to make its move. The Sword of Sword City was a legend in the hearts of all the swordsmen in the world. No one had ever seen that sword make its move. Just its existence alone was enough to suppress everyone. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the swords in the swordsmen's hands did not listen to their commands. They all flew into the sky and formed a path of swords to welcome the legend of the sword. It was an indescribable scene. The world was silent. Tens of thousands of swords were crawling and continuously humming. In the next moment, an edgeless sword appeared above the tens of thousands of swords. Without any hesitation, it flew towards the west with the tens of thousands of swords. Everyone in the world knew that the sword of Sword City did not break through to the innate realm. However, that did not affect the power of that sword. In Sword City, the strongest was that sword. Even Mu Qingshue's existence could not change that fact. The innate realm was the only limit in the world. Only the sword of Sword City, no matter what realm or cultivation it was nothing but a joke. In front of the legend of Sword City, everything was useless. Only the path of the sword was supreme. At that moment, everyone in the world could see that in the sky, tens of thousands of swords were paving the path. A sword was quickly flying towards the distance. It's here. In the first palace of the Eternal Night Divine Sect, the invincible martial monarch suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the layers of obstacles and looked at the sword that was quickly approaching. He had agreed to that sword-proving battle. Today was the deadline. There were very few experts in the world who were qualified to have him prove his sword-proving battle. A qualified opponent was extremely important to that sword of Sword City. Whoosh! In front of the first palace that was surrounded by the other palaces, a sword landed. White clothes, a cold face, and emotionless eyes were calmly looking forward, waiting for the opponent to appear. The martial monarch walked out with the divine halberd Tian Huang in his hand. He looked at the sword below with a trace of seriousness in his eyes. Please. Mu Bai said indifferently. The martial monarch walked forward. With a boom, his aura suddenly changed. A heavy pressure spread out, setting the start of the most intense battle. Clang, Mu Bai's body moved, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the martial monarch. His hand didn't move, and his sword didn't move, but the sword aura around his body automatically condensed, attacking the latter. The martial monarch raised his halberd and waved it. The tens of thousands of sword energies were instantly shattered, along with Mu Bai who had already arrived in front of him. However, when the afterimage dissipated, Mu Bai was still in the same place. He hadn't moved from the beginning to the end. The swords of Sword City, wherever the intent was, the sword would also be there. There was no distance between the intent and the sword. This was also the reason why Sword City was so strong. No one could be faster, more accurate, and more powerful than Sword City's sword. The invincibility of martial lords was due to the tyranny of their martial arts, and even more so because of their special physique. Blades and swords were hard to injure, and even if they were injured, they would not die. In this world, there was no one capable of defeating a martial monarch, and even less capable of killing a martial monarch. This was the reason why the 5 strongest people and one sword in the world were all undefeated. A newly advanced innate ranker might already be as famous as them in terms of title, but his true strength was still far from theirs. Mu Bai did not cultivate any heavenly book. Even though the travel scroll in Mu Qingshue's hand was given by him, the speed of Sword City's sword was still unparalleled in the world. Even Mu Qingxue who cultivated the travel scroll could not compare. The martial monarch waved his halberd. With one move, he split the space between the two. With one halberd, he cut through the gap between Mu Bai and Mu Bai. Mu Bai couldn't do limitless, but his true chi was boundless, so Mu Bai couldn't do it. The sword moved again. It avoided the desolate sky blade and condensed into the strongest point. With a so sound, it pierced through the martial monarch's body. The martial monarch groaned, but his expression did not change. Instead, he took a step forward and waved his halberd. The world lost its color. Mu Bai's hand moved and the edgeless sword appeared. He blocked the halberd with his sword and stepped back. The corner of his mouth was dyed red. After one move, both of them were injured. They were evenly matched. The sword advanced, then became even faster. The halberd advanced, then became even stronger. Their sharpness could not be touched. In the domain of speed and power, both of them were invincible. One was fast, one was strong. They fought to the peak of martial arts. The longer they fought, the heavier the injuries on their bodies became. Their sword intent spread throughout the world. The halberd's shadow swept through the army. They were unrivaled. They could only be faster and stronger. The battle between the two lasted from the night of the moon to the dawn. The strongest martial monarch and the strongest swordsman fought until the earth shattered and everything collapsed. Outside of the eternal night first palace, countless palaces had already turned into ruins. The more they fought, the stronger the swordsman's sword intent. The more they fought, the stronger the martial monarch's aura became. Finally, when the first rays of the morning sun shone down, the swordsman's sword intent rose to the peak. The martial monarch's aura also reached the peak. Final move, sword of proof. Mu Bai's eyes moved. His sword pierced through the clouds and raised the tribulation of the 9 heavens. Final move, end the legend of Sword City. The martial monarch faced the attack. The desolate sky blade in his hand raised the heaven and earth. Wind and clouds crazily swirled and covered everything within. This halberd was going to destroy the heaven and earth. Neither man nor sword would exist. Boom! The sword and halberd collided, raising a violent storm that covered the sky. Around the two people, the mountains and rivers were affected. The earth continued to collapse. The might of the destruction of the heavens, the scene of the destruction of the world, shocked the surrounding 100 miles. Gradually, the aftermath dissipated. Mu Bai's edgeless was quietly stabbed into the martial monarch's chest. The sword went in an inch and blood spurted out. Ding! Suddenly, a sharp and clear sound rang out. The long sword broke. The swordsman frowned. Looking at the broken sword in his hand, he was a bit unhappy. I've lost. Mu Bai calmly said. The victor has not been decided. At most, it's a draw. The martial monarch pulled out the sword from his chest and shook his head. The sword is already broken. How can I prove my sword? This battle has already been decided. Mu Bai indifferently said. Boom. Just at that time, a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. A white pillar of light rushed into the sky from the swordsman's body. The aura that shocked the world was the sign of breaking through to the innate realm. However, Mu Bai frowned. He glanced at the horizon and immediately waved the broken sword in his hand. In an instant, the strange phenomenon in the sky was broken. Noisy. The swordsman's impatient voice was still echoing. There was not the slightest hint of happiness. Little did he know that this was the realm that every martial artist in the world dreamed of reaching. At that moment, due to the appearance of the 8th innate realm, the world was in an uproar. However, before the crowd could even react, they saw an incomparably terrifying sword light cut through the sky. The sword shattered the strange phenomenon in the sky. Originally, there were still people guessing who this person who was about to enter the innate realm was. But with this sword, the answer was clear. In this world, the only swordsman who had such strength was the sword from Sword City. The only one who could look down on the heavens was also the sword from Sword City. The strange phenomenon collapsed. This time, the people of the world were even more confused. Could the sword from Sword City be considered to have entered the innate realm? In front of the Eternal Night First Palace, the martial monarch was also momentarily shocked by Mu Bai's actions. After a moment, he couldn't help but wildly laugh. His face was full of admiration. Heroic spirit. He thought he was already very tyrannical. He never thought there would be someone even more tyrannical than him. Breaking through the innate realm with a single sword. Such boldness, as expected of the legend of Sword City. The invincible martial monarch was still invincible. The news of the legend of Sword City being defeated quickly spread throughout the world. There was no sound of explanation in Sword City. After Mu Bai returned to Sword City, he disappeared. He wanted to wait for a sword that could allow him to prove his swordsmanship. In the southern border of Wuxia, Prince Yan, who had returned from the southern barbarian, brought Ning Chen and Ah Man to Prince Yu's residence. After almost 20 years, the brothers met for the first time. Prince Yu was very young. He was only in his early 20s. He had inherited the martial prowess of the previous Xia emperor. He was a very amiable prince. The meeting went smoothly. Prince Yu warmly welcomed the three of them. Prince Yan looked at his youngest brother. Although he still didn't speak much, his expression was much gentler. As the four of them chatted, Ning Chen and Ah Man basically became the background. Ah Man was someone who couldn't stay idle. Very soon, she showed a bored expression. Seeing this, Ning Chen immediately suggested to Prince Yan and Prince Yu that he wanted to take Ah Man out for a walk. Ah Man smiled happily without hiding anything. Prince Yu was startled at first, then he laughed loudly. This was the first time he met someone who found him annoying and boring. This pair of young people were indeed rare and interesting people. Ning Chen left with Ah Man. Prince Yu's smile gradually disappeared. He looked at Prince Yan and sighed. Third brother, you shouldn't have rejected the position of crown prince back then. Prince Yan frowned slightly. These words had hidden meanings and were very disrespectful. They shouldn't have come out of the former's mouth. Prince Yu said seriously, Third brother, I know you don't want to be bound by power, but the current Xia emperor is indeed not a wise ruler. Look at the current situation of Xia. It's already very dangerous. Don't say that again. Prince Yan coldly replied. Whether the Xia emperor was suitable or not, he was already the Xia emperor. As a prince, Prince Yu definitely shouldn't have said such words. Hearing this, Prince Yu sighed in disappointment. He helplessly shook his head and didn't say anything else. Ning Chen and Ah Man left the prince's residence and walked around the streets. Although the southern border couldn't be considered the true central plains, it was indeed much richer than the barbarian dynasty. Ah Man was very happy. The smile on her face never disappeared. She was very curious about everything, turning left and right to look at it. Ning Chen followed behind them. Seeing Ah Man's happy smile, his mood also improved. Because of the matter of breaking off the engagement, Ah Man hadn't smiled happily for a long time. Many times, he could see Ah Man in a daze alone in a place with no one around. The sadness that occasionally appeared in her eyes made him feel very uncomfortable. Ah Man was originally a cheerful girl. She didn't hold grudges or act coy. She said whatever she wanted to say. But now, she had become somewhat sentimental and learned to hide her emotions. She was the princess of the barbarian dynasty. She should have lived every day happily. Wilde's laughter seemed to have an indescribable power. Many people on the street smiled kindly at her. Everyone loved beauty. For such a beautiful girl to smile so beautifully, she was like a flower in the spring, causing people to feel relaxed and happy. She was pleasing to the eye. However, while some people appreciated flowers, others trampled on them. In this world, there would always be blind people who wanted to ruthlessly destroy this beauty. Miss, our young master invites you. Two men dressed as guards walked over and blocked Ah Man's path. I don't know your young master. You've got the wrong person. Ah Man was slightly surprised. There's no mistake. Miss, please, said the two guards coldly. Ah Man looked back at Ning Chen with some difficulty. She wasn't stupid. She could tell that these two people didn't come with good intentions. But this wasn't the barbarian dynasty. She didn't want to cause trouble for Ning Chen. Just as Ah Man was about to agree, a bone-chilling voice rang out from the youth behind her. She won't go with you. At this moment, Ah Man's pretty face broke into a smile, and her eyes glistened like limpid autumn waters. Chapter 64. A man consciously walked behind Ning Chen, giving him the authority to handle this matter. He was the one who had brought her out, so he should protect her. Her father had said that no matter if it was the barbarian dynasty or the Central Plains, if something happened, a woman could never walk in front of a man. She did not understand before, but now she did. In front of a man, Ning Chen's eyes were cold enough to freeze, causing the people on the street to unconsciously move aside. Just a moment ago, when this young man had been following behind the young girl, he had clearly been a good-natured youth with smiling eyes, quiet and warm. They did not expect that in just a short moment, a person could change so much. The two guards could also see that this youth was not simple, but as people of the Wu Ho government, in this southern borders Tianfu city, they had nothing to fear. The two of them stepped forward, wanting to forcefully grab him. Ning Chen's eyes became even colder, the killing intent in his heart difficult to suppress. He had finally managed to get a man to smile again, but now there were people who were blind enough to try and snatch her away. The Great Xia dynasty had been established for over 1,000 years, and the laws were strict. He did not expect that there would be such a thing as blocking people on the street and bullying people. "Miss, if you do not want your friend to be implicated, I advise you to come with us," one of the guards finally threatened. A man shook her head. "I'm not going." A cold smile flashed across the guard's face. She really did not know the difference between life and death. The other guard did not say anything, directly reaching out to grab a man behind Ning Chen. Shwa! The black light flashed and returned to its scabbard. Before anyone could react, they saw an arm fly out. Blood spurted out and splattered all over the ground. "I already said that she will not go with you." Ning Chen's left hand tightly grabbed the guard's throat, allowing the latter's blood to splash onto his body. Then, he tightened his grip, and the sound of bones cracking could be heard. The guard fiercely struggled, but was unable to move an inch. The expression of the guard beside him greatly changed, and he unsheathed his sword and slashed at Ning Chen. Humph! Ning Chen's eyes became cold, and his left hand pointed at the guard's sword. With a crack, the sword broke, and the guard flew away, blood spraying everywhere. Right at this moment, a man with a smile on his face slowly walked over. He wore an ice-blue satin robe, and his jet black and dense hair was simply tied up with a jade hairpin. Beneath his dashing eyebrows was a pair of slender peach blossom eyes that were filled with a smile, and he looked peaceful and harmless. "Friend, can you be merciful? Forgive this disappointing guard of mine," said Ji Yuntang warmly to the youth in front of him. "They are your subordinates?" Ning Chen turned his head and asked. "Yes." Ji Yuntang nodded. "That won't do." With that, Ning Chen loosened his grip. The instant the guard's body went limp, Ning Chen formed a sword finger and pierced through the guard's chi. The guard's body was sent flying, his cultivation base crippled. Ji Yuntang narrowed his eyes and didn't even look at the guard who flew out. He said softly, "This one is Ji Yuntang. I have yet to ask for your name." Ning Chen frowned. He had heard of this name before. It was possible that there were people with the same name in this world. But in Tianfu City, there was only one person called Ji Yuntang. He was one of the 10 marquises of the current dynasty, Marquis Ji Yu's only son. "He's called Ning Chen." Just as Ning Chen was frowning, Amon crisply interjected. She had heard that Ning Chen was very famous in the Grand Xia. Prince Yan had personally told her this. Prince Yan had said that Ning Chen had been a eunuch. He had beaten the empress's nephew, fought the true extreme emissary, and even bombed the imperial palace. Ning Chen was helpless. How could she reveal everything to her enemy so quickly? This girl's personality was too straightforward. In truth, he had never understood why Prince Yan was so indifferent to everyone. Even him, a sword attendant in name, didn't say much to him. Only Amon was an exception. It could be said that Prince Yan would grant Amon's every request. If Amon wanted to know about his past, Prince Yen would patiently tell her everything. He wouldn't hold back at all. Now, Amon basically knew all of his secrets. Even the matter of him being a fake eunuch had been dug out by her. The Empress's personal eunuch? As expected, as soon as he heard Ning Chen's name, Ji Yuntang immediately thought of his identity. And that was the only identity he could think of. Ning Chen was worried that Amon would let it slip again, so he spoke before she could. Yes. A man muttered unhappily in a low voice after being snatched away from her. You're the eunuch. Your whole family are eunuchs. Ning Chen heard it very clearly because he was the one who had taught her this. After hearing Ning Chen personally admit it, Ji Yuntang's expression immediately changed. He coldly laughed. He had thought that this person was some amazing person, but it turned out that he was just a eunuch by the Empress's side. He knew that this person was very famous, but no matter how famous he was still just a eunuch. To the side, Ning Chen calmly watched Ji Yuntang's expression change without saying anything. In truth, they were somewhat similar. They both liked to use smiles to disguise themselves. The only difference was that Ji Yuntang's patience was somewhat lacking. After knowing that his opponent's identity wasn't a threat to him, he immediately stopped pretending. I want this girl, Ji Yuntang said domineeringly. These were the most direct, domineering, and also the most brainless words Ning Chen had heard in the past few days. This young lady is mine. Ning Chen smiled brightly and replied in the same manner. Behind him, Amon immediately smiled like a flower. Although she knew that Ning Chen had said these words to infuriate this loathsome person, she was still very happy to hear them. Since you don't know the difference between life and death, then let's see who's the real deal. As expected, Ji Yuntang was infuriated and couldn't hold back any longer. He took a step forward and raised his fist, smashing it towards Ning Chen's head. He was a fifth-rank martial artist. Taking care of a little eunuch was nothing to him. Seeing Ji Yuntang's suicidal actions, Amon unconsciously retreated 2 steps. She understood Ning Chen's personality, so she didn't want to get too close. Ning Chen turned his head. Seeing Amon hiding so far away, he couldn't help frowning. He softly said, if Senior asks, you have to prove that I was forced to take action. Ever since he had been seriously injured last time, Prince Yen had forbidden him from casually taking action. He knew this was for his own good, so he had agreed. Sometimes, a man's promise was really troublesome. After Ning Chen finished speaking, he didn't wait for Amon's reply. He turned his head and looked at the fist in front of him. He clenched his right hand and immediately used force to break it. Immediately, there was a crisp crack. Broken bones broke and blood splattered everywhere. Ugh! The intense pain caused Ji Yuntang's face to immediately distort. However, before he could cry out in pain, he saw the sword in front of him and his mute point was instantly suppressed. After the fight, Ning Chen wiped the blood off his face and body. Then he looked at the clean man and finally understood why this girl had retreated just now. The girls of the barbarian dynasty were really smart. Amon was very happy. Even though she had been blocked and almost taken liberties. Now, she couldn't even stroll around the streets. However, she was still very happy. Thus, on the way back to Prince Yu's residence, Amon had a happy smile on her face. This made Ning Chen's displeasure disappear. Everything else was trivial. As long as Amon was happy, it was fine. Today's fight wasn't in vain. It was worth it. When they returned to Prince Yu's residence, Ning Chen was about to go back to change his clothes. Amon was also about to go back to rest. However, they met Prince Yen at the entrance of the residence. Prince Yen saw the happy Amon and Ning Chen covered in blood. He couldn't help but frown. Did you fight? Ning Chen nodded helplessly. Someone took liberties with Amon. I had no choice. They attacked first, man added. Prince Yen nodded and didn't pursue the matter. He asked, your injury didn't relapse, right? No, the other party was weaker, Ning Chen replied. That person is called Ji Yuntang, Amon added. Ning Chen was speechless again. Miss, it wasn't easy to smooth over the fight. Can you not ruin it at this time? Sure enough, Prince Yen frowned again when he heard this name. He seemed to have heard this name before. After thinking for a moment, he asked uncertainly, Marquis Ji Yu's son? Yes, Ning Chen replied. Prince Yen thought for a moment and then said lightly, if you fought, then so be it. I'll send someone to deliver medicine later. Thank you, senior, Ning Chen thanked him respectfully. However, Ji Yuntang's injury couldn't be cured with medicine. It took 100 days to recover from a serious injury, let alone a broken bone. Seeing that the two of them were fine, Prince Yen didn't say anything else. He turned and walked towards his room. Before turning, he paused and said calmly, don't fight again before your injury recovers. Yes, Ning Chen replied. After Prince Yen left, Amon touched Ning Chen's arm and asked, is that Marquis Ji Yu powerful? Ning Chen nodded. Very powerful. How powerful is he? Compared to you? Amon asked curiously. Ning Chen was helpless. How could he compare? It was impossible. But since Amon asked, he could only answer, he can beat 100 of me alone. So powerful, Amon said in surprise. She couldn't beat Ning Chen. Didn't that mean that Marquis Ji Yu could beat 100 of her? Ning Chen nodded with certainty. In the barbarian dynasty, her father was probably the only one who could suppress Marquis Ji Yu. Every Marquis of Great Xia was more than just a little powerful. Compared to Senior? Amon asked curiously again. Senior can beat quite a few of him. Ning Chen cut off the road. The Great Xia has so many experts, Amon's tone was filled with envy. In the barbarian dynasty, there were pitifully few martial artists above rank 7, let alone these powerful experts. Ning Chen didn't reply. In truth, the barbarian dynasty was not weak. Although there were fewer martial artists, the soldiers of the barbarian dynasty were all brave and skilled in battle. They were not to be trifled with. Unless a martial artist reached the Xiantian realm, there was no way they could contend against the war machines. No matter how strong a Hotian martial artist was, there would be a time when they ran out of qi. Once they ran out of qi, in front of tens of thousands of soldiers, only death would await them. In the past few years, the barbarian dynasty and the Great Xia had clashed many times. The Great Xia had also suffered many casualties. In the end, the Great Xia Emperor had sent one of the 10 marquises, Marquis Ji Yu, to personally suppress him. Only then did the barbarian dynasty gradually settle down. Of course, there was no need for him to say this to Amon. He also wouldn't say it. Amon's way of thinking was actually very simple. She could clearly distinguish between right and wrong, right and wrong. If it was right, she would do it. If it was wrong, she wouldn't do it. There was no need to beat around the bush. Sometimes, he really liked to talk to Amon. He didn't need to think about this and that. He only needed to simplify things and he would be able to get along well with her. For example, if he were to talk about the strength of martial arts in detail, Amon wouldn't be able to understand. But if he simply quantified the strength of martial arts, Amon would be able to understand. In reality, could Marquis Ji Yu really beat 100 of him? He didn't know. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. Maybe 100 wouldn't be enough. They had never fought before, so how would he know? However, that son of his was really weak. He could definitely beat 100 of him by himself. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.